Colleagues and members of the public, I'd like to welcome you all to the 13th meeting of the SPPC Committee. It is a virtual meeting as a result of the COVID-19 emergency. To be clear, City Hall is open to the public with reduced capacity and physical distancing requirements. Meetings can be viewed via live streaming on YouTube and the City website. For reference, the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility at london.ca or 519-661-2489 extension 2425. And to make a request specific to this meeting, please contact sppc at london.ca. Colleagues, I will look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. There was a motion intended to be intended to be raised this afternoon with respect to requesting advice from the medical officer of health. I'll recuse on that as I'm an employee of the medical officer of health.
Thank you very much. So noted. Any other disclosures? Councillor Morgan.
Yes, on item 2.4, which is the second report of the Rapid Transit Implementation Working Group, within that report, item 3.2, which is North Corridor Transit Review Options, I'll declare on that as I'm an employee of Western University and that impacts my employer.
Thanks very much. So noted. Any other disclosures? Councillor Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. On the same item that Councillor Morgan has just identified, although I'm not currently an employee of Western University, I do have a reasonable expectation of being one very soon in the future. So I'll declare pecuniary interest in the same manner.
Thanks very much. Any other disclosures? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Also with respect to another item on the SPPS agenda, which is the core area action plan update, progress update. Since this is a report just for receipt, I just raise it to identify there's a component within it that identifies, sorry, I just wanted to get the exact component in there.
Thank you. So noted. Any other disclosures, colleagues? Councillor Lehman.
On the same item as Deputy Mayor Helmer and Councillor Morgan, as I have a business on Richmond Street, I will declare a conflict on that portion of the report of the Rapid Transit Implementation Working Group.
Thanks very much. So noted. Colleagues, any other disclosures? Seeing none, thank you for all of that. Colleagues, we have several items on the consent agenda. I would ask if anyone would like to have any of these items pulled for a separate discussion. Councillor Squire.
Item 2.2, which is the London Community Recovery Network.
Thank you. So noted. Any other items, colleagues? Seeing none. Oh, sorry. Councillor Turner, please.
2.1, the core area action plan progress update, please.
Thanks very much. Any other items? So I'll look for a motion to accept 2.3 and 2.4. Is there a mover? Councillor Kayabag is seconded by. No one's prepared to second. Perhaps someone will if I ask twice. Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Any comments with respect to 2.3 or 2.4, which are the items on the consent agenda? Councillor Morgan.
Yes, on item 2.3, the London Economic Development Corporation activity update, I just wanted to say I appreciate the document. I had an opportunity to listen in to the LEDC's AGM, of which they talked about a number of these items as well, and I think it's a good report, and I see that we have started to move towards some of the metrics tracking in the new agreement, which I greatly appreciate.
Thanks very much. Any other comments? Councillor Lehman.
Based on the conflicts that myself and two other councillors have, probably should split out 3.2, I think, of the Rapid Transit Working Group report.
sorry, that's within, that's, so to separate 2.3, 2.4, Counselor?
It is, yeah, 2.4, just a specific item in 2.4, 3.2, the consent items in that report deals with an area of conflict.
All right, noting that, then let's deal with 2.3 specifically, the LEDC activity update. We have, by the way, on hand, Mr. Lacotia, for those who have questions with respect to that, and certainly our city manager with relation to that. Any questions or comments with respect then to 2.3, the LEDC? Councillor Kayababa. Could we get audio, please, Councillor Kayababa, please?
Sorry about that. Thank you. I just had a question. First of all, thank you for the report and everyone who's worked really hard on this. The metrics that I saw were quite large, so I can only imagine that it took a lot of work to be able to do this. I think my question is around, since LEDC is asked to do these metrics, are there any other sorry for the noise. Are there any other, are we asking anyone else to do these types of metrics, or is this something that we're looking to do, or we implement these sort of metrics to be the general go-to where other organizations as well are doing this? I'm sorry, I'm distracted by the sound of my son playing music in the background. Sorry about that.
Sometimes, Councillor, I'm distracted by my own voice, so let's just answer that directly. I would tell you that amongst us as council, and I would say some of my own specific questions at the time, there were certain metrics that were asked of the LEDC to provide, which they have paid attention to detail with respect to that. Whether that extends to other associated groups would be a fair question, but I think it was specific to LEDC at the time. So if anyone has any specific questions in relation to Councillor Kayababa.
Thank you. So I think the reason why I ask is that I'd love to see the other associated groups do something like this so that we can understand exactly what we're doing. I think this has given us an overview and understanding of what LEDC is doing for people who didn't have that understanding. And I think it should apply to other associated groups as well, so that we can have, if this is something that they're going to continue to do, as you can see that these metrics are very clear and I think they are long, but I'd like to see it come from the other associated groups as well.
Ms. Livingston.
Your Worship, if I could just add that the discussion of metrics with, in particular, Tech Alliance and Small Business Center, who are two of the three partners that I need to meet with quarterly, this is an active discussion with that group. In fact, we recently had a meeting. You can anticipate a presentation from those folks in the fall. And I think metrics will be part of that discussion. So this was a very specific thing that was in the agreement with LEDC, but we are also having an active discussion around what metrics should be reported on by the other two groups. And a number of other groups participate in our overall strategic plan metrics. So there's a couple of opportunities to be able to address that.
Thank you for that. Councillor Kayababa.
Thank you. Thank you. Mayor, as a follower.
I think you're frozen in time, Councillor.
Question, could this be something that, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
I was just asking if it's possible to potentially get other groups to use this as a template to use in order to get their metrics going.
Well, let me offer a thought before I turn over to the next speaker. I would think that if the associated groups that tie in, as opposed to having a blanket application, which may or may not have the specific implications to any group, that in fact, that if that is the wish of council members, to have them respond accordingly, and if you have associated connectivity to those groups, you're certainly welcome to direct that accordingly or through the appropriate councillor. Whether that's a blanket request, it doesn't, my gut reaction is it may not be a blanket request, because not every scenario is specific, as is the LEDC, but there may well be some similarity of metrics. Deputy Mayor Helmer, did you have some comment around that?
Not on that topic. Councillor Kaibaga's got the floor. I have a different question.
All right, so let's stay with Deputy Mayor. Deputy Mayor, let's stay with Councillor Kaibaga. Does that satisfy that, in fact, as these circumstances may well apply, that you could direct, or council members can direct and request that associated organizations provide similar metrics? The reason I'm being careful is because not every metric is the same with every organization. So I just want us to be very prescriptive if we're asking for certain things. I think your observation, Councillor Kaibaga, is a good one. But I would say that we want to be prescriptive as it relates to any organization that reports to council. Councillor Kaibaga, any other thoughts?
Yeah, so I understand that.
I think you're frozen again. Can we unfreeze the councillor?
Mrs. Livingston just mentioned that she would be. Can you hear me?
Yes, bits and bytes, so please try again.
I'll try again, and I'll try to get off and get on another network. But what I was trying to say is that I do understand that Mrs. Livingston just said that there is a conversation around it. And so it was just a suggestion that, and some metrics may not be exactly what you just mentioned, may not work for the other associated groups, but they could use some as a template and grab some things on there that they could actually use. So that's my comments. Not trying to move emotion or anything. I just thought that we should use this as a template because it's very thorough.
Thank you for that. Does anyone have any questions for LEDC specifically with respect to the activity update? Councillors, Deputy Mayor Helmer then, please.
Thank you. Question through the chair to Mr. Lakota. Appreciate the report. I'm looking at page 44 in our package, which is page 22 of the report. This is the employment in London CMA broken down by sector. And I wonder, I know this is not a report about 2020, but there is a sort of disproportionate number of employment in accommodation, food services, information, culture, recreation, transportation, and warehousing. These are areas that we know have been particularly hard hit by COVID pandemic. And I wonder if you wanted to speak briefly to what you're seeing in some of those places where we have a large percentage of the workforce in urban areas and in London specifically in those sectors.
Mr. Lakota?
Thank you. Through the chair. So first of all, for background, that table is the Statistics Canada table for employment in our immediate London area. And you're quite right in terms of the impact of COVID that was most felt in our economy. These were some of the areas that were hard hit: tourism, retail, Main Street businesses, accommodation, and travel industries. Over COVID, just to again give some background, one of the most important things that was done in this area was to disseminate information on government support programs, legal, accounting, and HR matters that were all sort of tackled through a series of webinars and access to subject matter experts. We know that it will be quite some time before these areas pick up again. In fact, in discussions with the airport as early as this afternoon, we're still pitching to some of the same airlines that were serving the London region earlier that are reevaluating their entire model. Even larger centers such as Toronto, Pearson International Airport had announced earlier today about a reduction in workforce, anticipating a lot of global changes in travel and related sectors over the next 2-3 years. So these are certainly, of course, the trend is global in nature, but coming back to more of a localized environment and what are some of those things that are being done to provide some relief. I believe as some of these restrictions start to ease, there will be a slow, gradual ramp up in these areas, but by no means to suggest that it'll be business as usual in a couple of months. There's a slow path to recovery here, but we are actively engaged in helping some of these smaller businesses adopt digital tools for a growing e-commerce marketplace, helping provide more virtual support, and just in any small ways that we might be able to provide relief at the local level. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Thanks very much. I thought it was important to just draw attention to that aspect, that the impact across the country is obviously very severe, but it's different in urban areas than it is in other places in the country. I did want to ask a second question, which is sort of on the next page of the report, and it's about the industrial vacancy rate. It's quite a bit down from what it was in 2012, for example. We're looking at 3.5 instead of 9.7% vacancy. And I just wonder if there's any commentary that Mr. Lacotia would like to make about that. I know we dealt separately at Corporate Services with the Industrial Land Development Strategy report, which is kind of related to this topic, but in terms of the vacancy rate there, any commentary you wanted to provide on the industrial?
Thank you, Mr. Lacotia. Mr. Lacotia, do you wish to comment?
Yes, sorry about that. I couldn't unmute myself in time. Through the chair, so if you look at the trend, it's been going down over the last several years. The London region has seen good absorption in industrial spaces, especially some of the newer construction that we have seen both in speculative industrial products as well as purpose-built for new investments that have taken place in this marketplace. So a lot of that absorption has come through a series of new companies locating here, as well as a lot of local expansions that have been underway as well. That cross-section, it has been quite diverse and well balanced between the traditional automotive uses of defense, aerospace, and automotive parts manufacturing, as well as a very strong emergence in food and beverage manufacturing. In fact, London area is now seen as one of the leading hubs for food and beverage processing, not just in the province, but nationwide as well. We are certainly getting great reviews from a food and beverage coverage standpoint. Those are the bulk of the areas that represent a reduction in the industrial absorption rate or vacancy rate rather, because we've had strong industrial land sales and there have been some really good significant amount of new users coming into the marketplace as well. I should also mention that some of this data is heavily impacted based on larger users coming in. So this would include Maple Leafs of the world, Dr. Oetker's and so on. These are very large spaces and they do impact these rates significantly. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
That's it for me. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Any other questions for Mr. Lacotia or questions with respect to the update around LEDC? Seeing none, it is moved and seconded, then we will call the question. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosi.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga. Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
So now we go back to 2.1, the Core Area Action Plan, the progress update. Colleagues, I will, before I look for a mover and seconder, I would invite Ms. Livingston or Mr. Barrett to make any comments. Beyond that, any questions that colleagues may have. Do Ms. Livingston or Mr. Barrett wish to make any comments?
Your worship, I'll turn it over to Mr. Barrett.
Mr. Barrett, please.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, Britt O'Hagan is here and she can speak to the specifics of the report and give you just a very quick overview.
So we are going down the yellow brick road. Ms. O'Hagan, if you would, please.
Hi, and can everyone hear me okay? No?
Excuse me, we're just trying to get the volume up on that for the benefit of colleagues around the chute.
Is this any better?
Much better. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Perfect. Through the chair, the Core Area Action Plan, as you all know, was approved or brought through council in the fall of last year. And since then, we have secured budget for some of the items through the multi-year budget process. So understanding some of the challenges that we're seeing, particularly in our core area with the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the reallocation of resources, we wanted to bring forward an update on some of the progress that has happened to date, as well as share some information on next steps. Through this process of updating or providing updates on key accomplishments, we did also take the opportunity to review that budget and see what items may be delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic or other reasons, and also to update those budgets to try and address a little bit of the deficiencies that we're seeing in the budget. So happy to discuss any of the items, and I will I'll also just say thank you and lots of appreciation to all members of SLT and all of the service areas. There's been a lot of work done, and it was also a lot of work put into providing the updates for this report. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. O'Hagan. Any questions for staff? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Worship. Thanks, Ms. O'Hagan. Through you, Your Worship, perhaps to Ms. O'Hagan, there's 3 items in here, or 4 items that I was a little bit curious about, specifically on the modified and operating budget. Earlier, Your Worship, I was trying to identify item number 53, which was the supervised consumption, made reference to supervised consumption facility. This isn't a report to approve or do anything about it, but it did mention it. I just did want to identify that that should there be an approval process to that, I'd have a conflict as I work for the health unit who's been involved with that file. But more specifically on items 36 and 37, which speaks to implementing a bit more of a clean regime downtown, as we're looking to try and figure out how to best use Dundas Place to open it to more, I guess, patios and things like that. Would it not make more sense to try and execute those functions to a higher standard so that the core was attractive to people coming downtown and helping to stimulate business while we're seeing reductions in other areas? The second question is around the experiment with temporary free municipal parking. I'd imagine that municipal parking revenues are down significantly to begin with. So are there really actually savings on that line? The final one was on 45, activate spaces in places with bistro chairs and tables. Again, I think this would be another thing that we'd want to try and accelerate to try and bring people downtown. So I guess to those 4 items, I was wondering if you might have some comment, Ms. O'Hagan.
Ms. O'Hagan, do you wish to comment?
Yes, through the chair, and I will, Ms. Scher can also jump in terms of some of the operational aspects of it. So just going down the list. So number 36 and 37, there was a RFP out for a pressure washing program, which actually came in under the expected budget. And number 36 is for staff resources, which have not been able to be hired at this point. So it's really addressing the partial year of staff resources as opposed to the full year. So Ms. Scher, if there's anything you wanted to add on that one.
Thank you, Ms. O'Hagan. That is accurate. The standard that we have established for cleaning in the downtown will still be met. With respect to the higher cleaning standard, that savings is all reflective of the time where we were not able to execute or hire the staff to do so. So as soon as we're able to get people in place pending council approval of this plan next week, we would intend to meet the entire standard as defined in the Core Area Action Plan. And Ms. O'Hagan described that we did very well with acquiring our pressure washer under budget through a rent-to-own program, and we will again be meeting the standards in the program. There are again some reduced operating costs because we weren't able to do that work until fairly recently.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you to you both. So back to the other question about the free municipal parking. I recognize that's a budget line associated with providing fee waivers for parking downtown, but I would see that as revenue lost rather than revenue obtained. And if we're going to be, I'd imagine that we've seen fairly significant decreases in parking revenues as well. So that line where it identifies a $25,000 savings, I'm not sure if that actually materializes at all. And the last part was if we're able to execute on activating spaces with bistro chairs and tables, which was budgeted and would be helpful to being able to animate the space.
So why don't we have Ms. O'Hagan comment on that in terms of the revenue loss gain, if we could, please?
Sure, through the chair. And I don't believe we have Mr. Katolik here, but it is an interesting point that you bring up, and it's something that I think through our partnership with the Honk app, we would be able to monitor and also the amount of money that has been collected. I don't think we have those figures, those live figures now in terms of parking, the amount of parking that's going on, but I would suggest that we could monitor that and likely report back on the actuals. So I can't really provide much on that one beyond that. I do know in terms of number 45 with the bistro chairs, through the Dundas Place program, there has been some furniture acquired specifically for that area. So we haven't moved forward with any of the additional bistro chairs at this point, but happy to hear any direction that you may have.
Councillor?
Yeah, I would like to see that executed. I think it would be important. I think as well, it'd be very important to understand what's happening with the free municipal parking. If there was a budget envelope of not realizing $150,000 in revenues, and we've come close to or have totally exceeded that budget envelope, then would we not want to be examining whether to reinstate parking revenues rather than going further and waiving parking fees?
Through the chair, so we've, this is George Costas talking, sorry. So
Mr. Costas, please, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we will have an overall shortfall in revenues. Councillor Turner is absolutely correct. However, this budget line, what is it reflecting, is actually against that specific item within the core area action plan and the amount allotted within it. But overall, you're absolutely correct. There will be a significant shortfall in parking, and this will be part of it as well, the utilization of the free 2-hour parking.
Thank you. Councillor Turner?
Well, at the appropriate time, I'd like to remove 45 from the modified operating budget, and I think that would be important for downtown. But I would also look perhaps to my colleague, Councillor Kayabagha, to see if there had been anything expressed from downtown London specifically about being able to help support the core in those areas.
If you're directing a question to Councillor Kayabagha, are you in a position to make some comment, please, Councillor?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Turner. I think, and if Mrs. Hogan can speak on this, there was a submission made by the Dundas Place in terms of deactivation and the closing of the Dundas Street, which we didn't have to bring to council because it was going to be done through administration. I don't know if she can speak whether this was something that was identified, but part of the consultation that we heard from the community is that they want to have spacing to be able to come downtown and sit. And sit and be able to use the space. So I would not remove it right now. I'd love to hear from Mrs. O'Hagan to see if this is something that was identified or not. I think that we need some type of bistro chairs and tables in the core if we're going to shut down the Dundas Place to be used by the community.
I think the fact that it was modified to 0 makes its statement, but perhaps Ms. O'Hagan, you have some thoughts on this, please?
Yes, so I will actually, through the chair, defer to, I see John Paul McGonigal is on here as well, and as kind of the liaison with the Dundas Place contract, I would put that to him to see what Parks and Rec has brought, what this has brought to their decision.
Mr. McGonigal, please then, go ahead.
Thank you, and through the chair. So this $50,000 is to support the operations of activating the space with bistro tables and chairs. So in the absence of our usual staffing levels, we just don't have the resources to be moving the tables, loading and unloading the tables, the appropriate number of trucks. And I think it's important to recognize that this report was submitted at a point in time. There is heavy cleaning standards on amenities that are shared. And we most certainly do not have the resources at this time to be able to be sanitizing what needs to be done after different members of the community are using them. And I get that things changed as of yesterday, but this report was submitted at a different time. So there may be some different permissions that are allowed now, but I just wanted to create that context around the bistro chairs and the activating of the space.
Councillor? Councillor Karabag, any other thoughts or comments?
Oh, thank you. I didn't know if this was going back to myself or Councillor Turner. Thank you for the extra insights. But I think that if we're going to use Dundas Street as a community space, we have to also be conscious that the pandemic is still here with us, and it's not that, and we have to continue to social distance. So I would not be comfortable removing this, as it would certainly support distancing in different areas of the closure part, the segments that are going to be closed for the specific times that it's going to be closed. I'm sure that more information will come, but I'm not comfortable removing this at this point because we might actually need it to make sure that there's enough distancing on the streets. I'm not sure if some of you have been able to be on the street on Dundas Place and see some of the patios that have opened. There might be a need to continue to distance in that way. So I'm not comfortable removing it. I don't know if Councilor Turner wants to still remove it, but I'm not comfortable to do that right now.
Well, I'm not sure that we're bouncing this back between councillors, but Councillor Turner, if you have a final comment on this before I recognize Councillor Lewis, please go ahead.
At the appropriate time, Your Worship, I think I would make the motion to remove that cost savings from the budget to allow the latitude to execute on purchasing bistro chairs and tables if staffing resources permitted that at some point in the future. So I'd hate to see it eliminated from the 2020 opportunities at this point because I think it will be important and possibly central to some activation in the stage 3 recovery.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if that'll require ultimately an amendment, but let's go with Councillor Lewis for his thoughts, please.
Sorry.
Thank you, Your
And
Worship.
then I will recognize, sorry, I apologize, Councillor Van Holst and Councillor Silly after that. So please go ahead, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mayor Holder. So I will not support putting the 50,000 back in for bistro chairs at this time. I listened in on corporate services yesterday. I will support the recommendation from that committee in terms of freezing councillor salaries. Not just one committee cycle ago, we voted to keep River Road closed because it was going to create another $80,000 hole in the budget right now due to COVID. If we're not maintaining our golf amenities, and we heard from staff then, they didn't have the staff and operating resources to run that course at that time. I'm certainly not prepared to move ahead with something new that we've just heard from staff. They don't have the staff resources to do right now. And even though we move into phase 3, there will still be a requirement to sanitize shared spaces. That's a labor-intensive effort. I also think that we want to be cautious, and we're going to be dealing with a motion later around masking in public spaces. I think we want to be cautious about how many gathering spaces we are providing. I very much And yes, Councillor Kaibeg, I have been downtown. I had the opportunity to have a bite of lunch out today, and did that last week as well. I continue to do what I can to support the downtown merchants.
Sorry, Councillor Lewis, was there a point of order, Councillor Turner? I wasn't sure if I heard that. Forgive me a moment.
If I may, Your Worship, just as a point of order, if I could ask the councillor not to conflate the two items so that I can participate in this component of the debate.
So he's asking that be separated. He's asking that the issue around masking not be equated to this only because he's not in a position perhaps to deal with that as an issue. But I also had Councillor Kayabaga, forgive me, was that a point of order, Councillor Kayabaga?
I'm not trying to call a point of order. I'm just trying to, I'll let the councillor finish and I'll speak after.
So noted, thank you. There is a list, so please go ahead, Councillor Lewis.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kaibega, and thank you, Councillor Turner, for raising that. I can certainly withdraw the mask equivalency. I hope it doesn't create a problem for you with regard to the sanitizing of the spaces. I don't know whether it does or not. Okay, I'm seeing you're indicating no, so because that's still a concern for me, and the staff that would be required to do that. We're still seeing in the future, because this was not a $50,000 item. It was actually, and I looked back in the budget, it was a $200,000 item. So there's still $50,000 allocated in the future years of the multi-year budget. This program will move ahead. It just won't move ahead right now. And I look at the fact that we are daily losing money on not collecting fares through London Transit. Additional costs are continuing to mount in other areas on COVID-19. So I think this is one that frankly can wait until next spring and then move forward then, perhaps with the support of the ambassador program at that point, which may make them more effective. And I just, without going into details as in terms of the length of the questions that I had, I want to thank Ms. O'Hagan for responding yesterday to the questions I had around the ambassador program and what the a request for expressions of interest and ultimately the RFP will be in terms of timelines there. So I support leaving some money in the ambassador program, even though we won't see those feet on the street until next spring because they need that lead time to move into there. But I don't see the need for the lead time on the bistro chairs.
Thanks very much. Councillor Van Holst.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. And through you, to our staff, I've got a question. I looked at the report and saw the two things that were brought down to zero and number 45 as we discussed. I presume that was because of social distancing. The other one is enforcing the loitering regulations, and that seems somewhat counterintuitive in terms of the COVID-19. If someone's loitering outside your business door or in a doorway, that makes it difficult for the social distancing of people who want to enter the premises. So I'm wondering why this item was removed through you.
Ms. O'Hagan.
Hi, through the chair, this item, the budget directly ties to the salaries of bylaw enforcement officers who have not been able to be hired at this point. And that the division expects that by the time there's a lift on a hiring freeze and the ability to hire and train appropriate bylaw enforcement officers, that it would likely be looking at next year.
Councillor Van Holst, are we good?
Okay, thank you. That answer is satisfactory.
Thanks very much. Councillor Saleh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just let me know after if you guys can see me when I put up my virtual hand, because I had it right at the start of when the agenda was on. My question is regarding number 29, and I actually have a motion that I wanted to bring. So I'm not sure if there's actually a motion right now on the floor, so I don't want to confuse things. So if you could just let me know about that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, there is not as yet. It's not been moved and seconded, so there may well be, but why don't we then put that into abeyance as we hear from Councillor Morgan. Unless you have other comments, Councillor Saleh?
So sorry, so did you want me to not ask my question and deal with my motion regarding 29 at this point?
You certainly are welcome to. It's your pleasure.
Sure. So my question regarding 29, I know I've kind of touched on this last time when the core area action plan discussed, and for those who can't follow it, 29 is enforcing loitering regulations. And so my concern is, as I stated in the past, $150,000, you know, we were able to avoid that this year. But moving forward, I have a concern that we're putting that much resources towards essentially moving people around and essentially finding people who are displaced persons or don't have a place to go. So I'm not in support of that. So I just want to just put the motion out and just see where that goes. So I'm hoping to just move that we cancel the loitering enforcement, the $150,000 budget line, and to see if staff can provide an update of where best to relocate those, reallocate those funds at the next update. But before I formally put it on the floor, if they could just advise if there's any implications with bringing that forward, that motion, if it passes.
So Councillor Slee, I might mention that, so for this year, we have moved that number to 0, and I might defer to Councillor Morgan in terms of the multi-year budget, that might be considered for a future budget. No doubt that will be all part of the discussion we have next year. Not sure if Councillor Morgan has any thoughts or comments about that specific comment of yours. Councillor Morgan?
Yes, I'm happy to comment on that. And to Councillor Sally, so as you can clearly see, the money is not in the budget. It's a savings for 2020. We will engage in a discussion this fall about making amendments to the future years of the multi-year budget when we do the annual budget update. And I think if you're looking to make modifications to the item 29 in the core area action plan, certainly that process would allow for you to make adjustments in the years to come on that budget, and we could certainly consider it and debate it at the time. I don't think it would be necessary here, as this is just a staff update on the modifications they're making to the 2020 plan.
Councillor Slee, are we good?
No, so I understood that the budget wasn't allocated for this year, as I stated. So my concern is, I recognize there's a hiring freeze right now, but with the current direction that staff have, you know, if everything goes back to normal tomorrow, my understanding is staff could essentially then go and hire those bylaw officers specifically to deal with this budget line item, and then we'd be in a more of a difficult position at that point. So unless someone could give me 100% assurance at this point, because I do not support spending $150,000 of taxpayer money to move people around. So if I can get that on the record, that'd be helpful.
Maybe I can weigh in on this.
Sorry, who's weighing in? Because it's hard to tell from who's there in the hinterland.
It is George Kotsifas again.
Mr. Kotsifas, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the wording in this is actually not helpful because it only references loitering. The intention was not just to move people around. It was really it was an enhanced level of enforcement in the downtown, particularly related to property standards, graffiti, and as a result, also it would include folks that are camping out or damaging storefront properties. So it's a broader level of enforcement. It's not specific to loitering, but in terms of the assurance, this report, we hope being adopted by council would give you assurance that we are not spending the money this year, so we would not be hiring those to enforcement staff.
Can I add to this, Councillor Slee, that this was a decided matter of council. We have a recommendation adjustments associated with the modified operating budget. To change beyond this, it would require a significant higher number of colleagues to support that as a recommendation. So you've heard from Councillor Morgan to say that this year it is off the table. We've heard that it's loitering and enforcement. What's your pleasure, Councillor Slee?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Costas, for clarification. So, my question, I guess then, based on what Mr. Costas said, if I just ask that we remove the wording in line 29, which reads enforce loitering regulations, to remove that from the core action plan as an item, then essentially I think it addresses my concern. So I just want to know if I can then do that, since that isn't necessarily contrary to what was already a decided matter of council. If I'm just asking that enforcing loitering regulations is removed from this business case, or sorry, from this core action plan.
Well, my sense, Councillor, is that because we are talking about a prospective savings of some $150,000, that is a decided matter. So I don't think we can eliminate that without some support from council to either A, ignore it, which case then then it would be enforced, or we remove it from this year's budget, in which case then we deal with the 2021. But I don't think we can just eliminate it without including it. So to eliminate it means it's included, and to support the direction of this business case to remove it means that for 2020 it is done. So I'm at your pleasure. We can pay attention to this for the following year and determine, as Councillor Morgan has indicated, as budget chief, in terms of some of the things we might do. But I'm at the pleasure of council if we want to do something with that. I do have a list already, but I'm going to stay with Councillor Salee first. Councillor Kayabagi, you're already on the list, so I'm not going to add you to the list. You're already there. Once we've heard from other members of council on this issue, Councillor Salee, do you want to carry on with this further?
So just to clarify, I totally understand that there's $0 for this year. So my concern is moving forward. And so Mr. Costas had stated that that the scope of what those $150,000 moving forward would accomplish is more than what is just listed on item 29, where all it specifically says is enforcing loitering. So that's my concern. So what I was saying is, could that language just not be removed, just a motion to remove that language? Because I think that sends the wrong message, and I don't support that. So if staff could just clarify, if I guess is that contrary to the decided matter if we're just removing that, and if that poses any issues for administration?
I think if the question were, without being a lawyer and wanting to call on Councillor Squire, but I'll hold on for a moment here, and that is that if Mr. Costas has wording that is generally acceptable to colleagues, I don't think we can remove the item without causing other challenges. Mr. Costas, do you have any opinion on this that would bring some wisdom and insight and the benefit of your years to this thought process?
Through the chair, I'm wondering if I'm understanding, I think the concern is really the title or the nomenclature used for this item, and maybe it could
it would appear
to proactive bylaw enforcement action or something to that effect. I'm not sure how you do that. The way it was, I guess, presented in the core action plan and the multi-year budget was actually the way it is worded, and that's why it's reported on it in that way. But ideally, it probably is more suited to be a proactive bylaw enforcement.
So let me just ask colleagues, and starting with Councillor Salee, would proactive bylaw enforcement be more appropriate for the purpose we're trying to dance on the head of a pin, but more thoughtfully? Does that satisfy Councillor Salee?
Sorry, are you asking me, Mr.
I am.
Or, yeah, so I'm fine with it saying proactive bylaw enforcement minus loitering. I just want to make that explicitly clear, that the enforcement of loitering in that motion, if that's fine, then I'm good with that. And I have no problems bringing that forward right now if that's appropriate.
So perhaps when we move this, we may well move item 29 to say proactive bylaw enforcement, unless colleagues have some view to the contrary. So having said that, I'm going to move down the list, and we'll keep that item very much in mind as I look to Councillor Morgan for his comments, please.
Yes, so I believe I'm making general comments on the report now because I don't think there's any motions. Okay, good. First off, I want to thank staff for the work that they've done in this report. As you know, colleagues, there's been a number of reports that have come before us with staff trying to do their best to reshape budgets and help us deal with the deficit position we have. And with the actions contained in this report, there's $875,000 that can partially offset the financial pressures faced by COVID. which are still well over $10 million projected through the end of August. So I know that it will be tempting to want to go through these items and pick one by one, but I think, you know, when you look at the capital projects we've deferred and the actions that we've taken across the board on the operating side and the service reductions that we've had to take, there will be changes in every area and probably every plan we have to a certain degree. And I think on some of the suggestions related to bistro chairs and tables, I think Councillor Lewis spoke well to say that 50,000 represents the 2020 budget. Our staff have said they don't have the staff to actually spend that money this year, so it's probably appropriate for that to land in savings, knowing that there is still budget to make those purchases in future years. And we're not going to be able to do all the things we want to do, and we're not going to be able to achieve all of the plans to their fullest that we planned. And we're probably, you know, starting the process of some tough conversations on components of our plans that we're going to have to make sacrifices for. So I think that this is a great effort by our staff to provide us with some options. I appreciate the debate and dialogue around some of the components of those options. I personally will be supporting the entire report as contemplated, and I think that, you know, we'll certainly have a lot more work to do on the fiscal side of things as well. I certainly will recognize, though, we have made investments in areas related to recovery where we need to, and certainly through the work of the task forces and the recovery task force, we're going to need some capacity to probably do some more. So we have to be cautious about where we add things back in, and I want to kind of keep that, you know, in reserve so we can deploy it with those really important recovery activities that are forthcoming.
I know I purposely not requested someone move in second, allowing this discussion to carry on. Deputy Mayor Helmer, you are next.
Thank you very much. I wanted to make a couple of comments generally about the report. First, I really appreciate the care and concern that went into trying to identify what could be modified. You know, keep the things that are most important and urgent going ahead. And I think that largely speaking, that's what's happening in the report. I also think getting the update on how things are going, so much has been accomplished in a very short period of time. And I did want to comment on that. So we have obviously the informed response improvements, which are number one, the Stability Week project, which happened very quickly after the Core Area Action Plan was approved, and I think was a good success. The increase to the foot patrol, which has been something that many people have been asking for and has been already delivered, and I think has been very effective on the street. The folks who are working in that area are doing great work, getting to know people, to resolving things that are in a collegial way, and to work really well with the business owners who are operating along the commercial corridor. And I just wanted to recognize that. The head lease program, you know, we've made really great progress on number 5, the head lease program, which I think is leading the way in terms of municipal responses to homelessness and housing stability, trying to get people into housing and make the barriers that are blocking them from getting into housing go away where we can. The stabilization space where the property has been purchased, I think that's also another really wonderful step forward in a very short period of time. And then there's the permanent housing, number 22, you know, supportive housing, and the big contribution that has been made already to a project that's going to be under construction shortly. I just wanted to mention some of those because I know we're looking at the budget changes, and I think largely speaking, these budget changes are appropriate. I think what I've heard from Oldies Village Business Improvement Association, for example, is that they recognize, you know, this is the interesting times with really challenging circumstances for people, and adjustments have to be made. And, you know, I think they're largely supportive of the changes that are being made. The proactive bylaw enforcement, you know, I think that is appreciated by a lot of the business owners, but I can see why folks would want to dial back on that. And certainly while we're in a hiring freeze, you know, it's just not happening. And I think we have to look at 2021 and 2022 when we're doing the budget updates, that's a good time to talk about, do we really want to add resources into that area, or is there some other higher priority item that should be dealt with instead? And I think the 2021 budget update is probably the appropriate place to deal with that discussion. I did want to say thank you to the staff who've been working in this area. I know it's cross enterprise. There's a lot of people from a lot of different areas working on the various projects in the Core Area Action Plan, and it is much appreciated. by people who are living and working, running businesses, living on the street in the core. I think a lot of people really are supportive of the major moves that have happened, especially the things around housing that they just were not happening a couple of years ago to this kind of scale. And I think we need to see a lot more of that. And I appreciate that we're keeping focused on the important stuff in this report.
Thank you. Councillor Squire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to, I'm going to be fairly brief. I just want to deal with I think they're motions that are being brought to make changes to the report. And people are talking about motions. I think they should have been, the report's been out since last Wednesday. These things have been in the reports. Questions could have been asked at staff. And I won't be voting for motions that are suddenly proposed verbally at the floor of the SPPC. I expect better, and I'm speaking very strongly on this because I've always maintained that position, so I'm not going to support them. And I will always provide my colleagues with sufficient notice of motions and applications that I intend to bring so they're aware of them. I'll speak on another one later on that I received today. On the other issue, which is the substantive issue, is look, we made decisions in the past. Many times I've heard some councillors around the table say, look, we've got to stick by the decisions we made. If we've made a decision to make amendments to a budget, we've got to stick with them. And we've got to look at the entire picture. So to be going through sort of piecemeal and saying, well, let's put this back in now. Let's take this out now. I just think that makes for very strange discussions at council. And I don't think it's great decision making. So that's where I am on this, and I hope we move on quickly to matters that we are aware of that are on the agenda and get them dealt with.
Thank you. Feels a bit like the budget process from time to time. I have actually coming back in, thank you, Councillor Squire, Councillor Kayabagha for a comment, and then I'm going to ask the clerk to comment, which may give wisdom to all of us. Audio, please, Councillor. Councillor Kayabagha, audio, please. It looks like that is not happening. It looks like you have some challenges. So I'll tell you what, why don't you see if you can adjust that? We'll look to our text for any wisdom. I'll ask the clerk. Are you there, Councillor Kayabagha? Are you back? Yeah. Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I also wanted to, I don't even know where we're at anymore because it seems like there's been a lot of items that have brought.
We are just to be clear with everyone, we are on 2.1 Core Action Plan. No amendments have been made. People are just commenting on it and have lots to say. So you've spoken once, and please, you're welcome to make another comment.
I have not spoken on the actual motion that's on the table.
Well, there isn't a motion purposely, Councillor. I have not put that forward as a motion. So please go ahead.
Okay. So I'm going to speak on the core action plan. Earlier, I was asked a question, which is what I answered, but now I'm actually going to make my comments that I wanted to make from earlier, and realizing that Councillor Turner and I were actually saying the exact same thing. He just caught me off guard when I was waiting to speak on my turn. So I do want to also see number 45 be dealt with separately, because as we just moved into phase 3 of the pandemic, and the announcement was made yesterday by the province, I think that it's important that we look at ways that we can support the Dundas Street, especially with the closures that are going to happen on different segments of the Dundas Place. It's important that we do support having bistro chairs and tables, so I'd like to deal with number 45 separately. I also wanted to comment on the work that staff have done. I've been able to assist some of it once in a while, and I think that the work that they've done is really great. I don't know if Councillor Turner is still interested in moving a motion. I would like to second it if that's what you were going to do, but I did want to ask to separate number 45. Earlier, we were saying the exact same thing. It just caught me off guard, and I completely lost track of what I wanted to say.
So I know that Councillor Turner has something to say, but why don't I ask the clerk just to jump in because it ties into something that I think that Councillor Slee was commenting on, and we'll see where we can take this. Clerk, do you want to add some wisdom to this?
Thank you. Through the chair, I just wanted to point out that at the time that the budget was approved earlier this year, Business Case 7A addressed the core area action plan, and specifically Initiative 29 was identified within that business case, and it was described as proactive bylaw enforcement, and that change was made during the budget process. So the staff report in front of you should reflect that wording. So I don't feel that an additional amendment is necessary within the report, but that going forward, that Business Case 7A and specifically Initiative 29 should be referenced as proactive bylaw enforcement.
Hopefully that satisfies colleagues. Councillor Turner, you want to move back into this, and you were the first to comment. Do you have some brief comments on this, please?
Yeah, very brief, thank you, Your Worship. So my colleagues, I think unless we change the council procedure bylaw, any councillor has prerogative to raise any order of motion at any time. So I reject that argument coming from my colleague, but
so noted. Thank you.
I appreciate his concerns. With respect to this item, I do have some concerns because this was a past budget item within this calendar year, so I would consider this reconsideration. But for the purposes of recognizing the situation we're in general, I can appreciate what is put forward here and things where it may be difficult to execute them. My point on 45 is that if we're going to try to reanimate Dundas Place, and it's been a little slow, I think more as a result of the Downtown London Business Association rather than staff. I think staff have been quite open to closing the street and allowing patios and trying to make as much of a permissive environment as possible. But in order to animate that space, this is an essential component. If staff are unable to execute on that, I recognize that, but I don't want to remove the prerogative from being able to do that. And so that's why I think it might be appropriate, as Councillor Kabaga had identified, to just call that separately, or the alternative is to have it as a motion that that budget not be modified for item 45. So I think perhaps through your worship to the clerk, just seeking the best way of identifying that, whether it's through a motion to alter number 45 and not have that removed from the budget, or to call it separately.
So noted. Thanks very much. So the wisdom I have from the clerk, she's certainly welcome to comment, and I'll defer to her, and then I will add my comments. Go ahead, please, Clerk.
So what I have drafted for the members' consideration is a motion that reads that Action 45, active spaces and places with bistro chairs and tables, be removed from the 2020 modified operating budget for the core area action plan.
And through your worship, if I might just clarify that it's not to remove it from being actioned, it's from the modified budget. So, so basically to restore or to maintain the budget as budgeted at when we did the core area action plan.
So understood, Councillor. So if we've got the appreciation for that wording, do colleagues have questions with respect to the wording of that motion? And I will look to the clerk to determine if in fact we have to fine-tune that slightly. So colleagues, I'm going to suggest that in the interests of moving this forward, that we vote on all and exclude, as Councillor Kayabaga had suggested, item 45 and deal with that separately, and then we can determine if that makes sense or not. So if colleagues are comfortable with that, then why don't we proceed accordingly? I see Councillor Slee's hand up. Is that intended, Councillor Slee?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment about the general motion, not the motion, but the agenda.
Okay, well, just But if we can just stay with this item here, the intention then is we've been asked to deal with item 45 as a separate item, which I'm comfortable with proceeding accordingly, unless colleagues have a different consideration of that. So with that, we will then move on the staff recommendation with respect to all of this, save and accept item 45, and I will advise you when the clerk is ready accordingly. Colleagues, we'll be with you in just a moment. I'll ask the clerk to read what we're voting on, please. Let's hear what the clerk has to say, and then I'll look for a mover and a seconder when that is done. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, the motion prepared is that the following actions be taken with respect to the Core Area Action Plan, Part A. The staff report dated July 14th, 2020 be received for the purpose of providing Municipal Council with an update on the progress of the implementation of the Core Area Action Plan. And Part B, the modified operating budget for 2020 components of the Core Area Action Plan 2020 to 2023, additional investments business case, excluding item 45, activate spaces and places with bistro chairs and tables, in the amount of a reduction of $50,000 be approved.
Do I have a mover? Councillor Turner, do I have a seconder? Councillor Hopkins. Let's call the question. We've had a lot to chat about here.
Everything but.
Here we are, colleagues. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
And now we have, colleagues, the item 45, which is the activate spaces and places with bistro chairs and tables. I wonder if I could look to the clerk just to clarify the amendment, and then I'll look for a mover and a seconder of it, and we'll see where we go with that. So the suggestion by the clerk, who always shows wisdom, is that we vote on this as recommended, which is the removal or the savings of $50,000 associated with the spaces and places of bistro chairs and tables. So to vote in favor of this, you are voting to accept the savings. If you're voting to the contrary, you are not. So with that, when the clerk is ready, I will call the question. Is there a mover? Councillor Morgan. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lewis. Just bear with us, colleagues. Any question about what we're voting on here? Councillor Van Holst, not an opinion, but is there a question about what we're voting on?
Well, I think we're at liberty to comment on what we're about to vote on, are we not?
Apparently we are.
Okay, that's wonderful. So, you know, it's interesting how many ways there are to look at a particular item. I think in this case, I'll tell you why I'll vote against this, and with Councillors Turner and Kayabaga, the $50,000 is for the purchase of some items we'll be using in the future. That money's just going to, or may just sit until we actually purchase those. There's a lot of businesses going out of business, and so something like this could actually make a difference to our economy. I don't know if these are our local purchases or not, but I'm inclined to go ahead with the purchase because, you know, by holding money away, a company might go out of business, and then all of a sudden there's a greater demand for these items. They could be harder to get and more expensive in the future. So I'm happy having these things, whether or not we're able to use them at this time is another question, but I'll be voting against this item for that.
Thanks very much. I'll call on Councillor Lewis, please.
Thank you, Mayor Holder. With all due respect, I attracted the mayor's attention here on a point of order because Councillor Van Holst, we heard from staff earlier, this is an operational expense. This is for staffing, deployment, sanitizing of, this is not for the purchase of the furniture. So that point that was just raised is not, from my understanding from Mr. McGonigal and his comments earlier, this is an operational expense. It is not a capital expense. And with all due respect, Councillor Van Holst, the point you just made would in fact be contrary to what staff had informed us earlier.
All right, so I know I'm going to recognize Councillor Kayabaga in a moment, but rather than dance on this, why don't we just ask Mr. McGonigal, are we talking operating expense or are we talking acquisition of stuff? Mr. McGonigal.
Through the chair, we are talking about operating expenses, not capital purchases. So we are talking about operating expenses in terms of the bodies and the equipment to move these tables in and out and store them at different times. This is not about the purchase of the actual tables.
Thanks for the clarification, Councillor Lewis. Any other comment? Thank you. Councillor Kayabaga, I see you want to be acknowledged. Go ahead, please.
Thank you for making that comment very clear, but I'm still going to ask my colleagues not to support this elimination of specific money because we are still in a pandemic. We still need to keep the community safe, and I guess I can ask a question through you to staff, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead,
what
please.
happens if this, if this gets removed and there are, this work still needs to be done, what happens? Is this something that we're going to have to come back in a meeting to decide on again after the Dundas request to shut down the space is going to be approved?
So noted. Mr. McGonigal, thoughts?
Yep, absolutely. So through the chair, this money was to support the bistros and chairs for the remainder of the core. It is important to note that Dundas Place already has bistro tables and chairs. We do probably have some abilities to work within existing operations, perhaps if they come forward with a road closure request to support Dundas Place, but this is for the remainder of the core. And so I just wanted to provide that context. I hope that answered your question,
Councillor Kayabaga.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to clarify, he did mention if they come, but they have submitted a request. Am I correct? Because I'm under the impression that they have submitted a request and I've seen the request.
Mr. McGonigal.
So through the chair, road closure requests go through the roads department. I am uncertain if they have received a formal request to date, so I will seek Kelly Scher, Ms. Scher's input on that.
Ms. Scher.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, we have not received a formal request to date that I'm aware of as of mid-afternoon today.
Ms. Kayabaga.
Thank you. Again, through you, Mr. Mayor, but there was a request to look at a program of closing Dundas Street to you, Mr. McColligan, and he came through Parks and Recs because I saw it myself. So I'm just wanted to clarify that that happened.
Mr. McGonigal, do you have any comments on that?
Yep, through the chair. I know that downtown London and the city have been working together on some future opportunities on what that may look like. I believe those ideas are still being crystallized, and I don't believe the formal process of road closures through the roads department has actually taken place yet. But we are aware that they are working on some items. But again, this is around the operations to support the deployment of bistro chairs for the entirety of the core. And we currently just don't have the resources to do it. So that is where we're at. If we're directed to do it and opportunity allows, then we most certainly will undertake it.
Any further discussion on this, colleagues? Councillor Van Holst, do you have a quick comment coming back? And by the way, it doesn't have to be quick apparently, but if you do have a quick comment, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. And just wanted to also thank Councillor Lewis for the clarification. I thought I heard something at the beginning of the conversation that led me to believe otherwise about the expense. However, at this point, I suppose I'm fine with the savings. We could always revisit this if it looks like it was different. It seems like Dundas Place will have an opportunity to do this. I'll thank staff for finding some savings. Thanks.
So thank you. Colleagues, what you have in front of you is a recommendation to support the the staff recommendation with respect to the savings. This has been moved and seconded. So with no other discussion seen, let's call the question as the clerk is able. And by the way, for the benefit of colleagues, if you vote yes, you are voting to support the savings as they appear in front of you. If you're voting no, it is to the contrary. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Councillor Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Nope.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
No.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayavaga.
No.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 12-3.
Thanks, colleagues. And I will now take you to, we're still working with the consent agenda, and we are now under item 2.2, the London Community Network. So I will turn your attention to that, please, on page 19 of our schedule. And I might ask Ms. Livingston if she has some comments with respect to it. And then we'll open up for dialogue.
Thank you, Your Worship. At the last council meeting, staff were asked to come back with a proposed model with respect to creating a London recovery network that built upon the good work of the task forces, both the economic and social task forces. We undertook to look at a number of models that have been successful in our community in terms of methods for community engagement and moving quickly to get work done. We built on those kinds of models, which is why you see in front of you a proposed approach that looks at a governance structure of a forum, bringing together a number of organizations, the use of sector or issue tables that might be identified by that forum, and a backbone team, or otherwise called a staff working group, to support, essentially providing the arms and legs to support both the forum and the sector tables to do their work. We've also tried to identify that we believe that the recovery network would likely be focused in two ways. First, in the short term, for immediate items for action to support recovery, and then also with a longer term view of a shared understanding of what London's recovery looks like and the many things that we might need to do together to be able to achieve that recovery over a longer period. So that's the model that we've put in front of you for your consideration this evening.
Thanks very much. Before I open this up to comments and questions, you'll see that on page 19, we have a recommendation and that the network model be endorsed and that civic administration be directed to work with the mayor to constitute the LCRN. I would like to revise that slightly, colleagues, and if I might, I'm going to suggest that that's to work with the mayor and council to constitute the LCRN. I think that's more appropriate, and I think it's more consistent with the direction that we have tried to take this. So I will reserve comment on that and may make an appropriate amendment, but I just want to let colleagues know how I feel. This is not a mayor-driven initiative. This was certainly with the leadership of the mayor and deputy mayor and a number of council members who were particularly active, helpful. So with that, let's open it up to some comments or questions, and then we'll see if there's an appropriate recommendation moved and seconded. So comments or questions? Councillor Squire, thoughts?
I appreciate the intent behind this entire process, and I'm not judging that at all. I just see problems with the way this has been laid out in writing and how it relates to the activities of councillors. And maybe that can be corrected, I don't know. But there's a leadership forum that's led by the mayor, which will guide the overall focus. There's then theme or discussion tables that will be, which will be formed by the leadership forum. It says the leadership forum may establish sector or issue tables. It then says these tables could also be filled with a lot of different people. It says including members of council. So the way I read it and the way it's written is there's absolutely no requirement to have councillors sitting on tables, being involved in any of these activities. It's up to the initial group to make that decision. I think that's not what the intention is. I think, and I'm hoping the intention is to have councillors involved on tables and in areas where they have some expertise. To not do that and not have councillors involved throughout means that people sitting at those tables are not going to be hearing from councillors who have direct involvement, in my own case, in transit, other people in other areas where we can be helpful and valuable. So I'd like to have some reassurance that councillors will be given the opportunity to be members of these tables within areas that they have expertise, and I don't know who can answer that for me.
I thought I had in part, but let's move to Councillor Hopkins for her thoughts as well. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be interested in getting the answer to Councillor Squire's question as well. So I appreciate that question because I do think it is important to have council involvement, especially when it comes to that expertise. I just do want to make a comment, and I'm very supportive of this London Community Recovery Network. I want to thank you and Deputy Mayor Helmer for the work that you did on the task force, the mayor's task force. And that was an opportunity where we as councillors were able to listen to what was going on in the community as changes were occurring. It was a great opportunity and really appreciate that, being able to do that. And for me, as we go through the recovery process, I think what is really important here in this network is that community engagement. I think councillors have the opportunity and to, especially to the network, to take advantage of the expertise that some councillors can bring forward. But for me, revitalizing the community as we recover, this is a great opportunity to continue the work from the task force, but also to be engaged in some way to revitalize the community. One of the things that I still remember listening in on these conversations was how we were duplicating, how different groups, organizations were duplicating information and not sharing information. All those things, to me, this is where this network has an opportunity to do that. So whatever shape and form this is going to happen and take place, I am looking forward to being a part of that. I appreciate your comments about adding council in the recommendation. Very supportive of that, and just want to thank everyone for continuing the work, because obviously there's a lot of work that goes into that. So thank you very much to staff and to you, Mr. Chair, and to the Deputy Mayor as well with the work that was done previous to this network.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hopkins. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I echo what Councillor Squire and Councillor Hopkins both just said. For me, I actually think that your suggested amendment is a good starting point, but I think the bigger issue is where we have sector issue and theme table discussions, and we talk about these tables would be populated by individual businesses and community partners with expertise and interest in the issues. I think that's where we need to have it say, as well as members of council, not have the members of council put in the section that said could also be filled with. And I've actually am sending some draft amended language over to the clerk for her consideration there. I think it's important that there's a member of council on each of these sector tables. Not a could, but a will. However that looks as we develop things together, because ultimately the ideas and the suggestions coming out of these sector tables are going to have to come back through the council body for ratification. And I think having a council member on each of these is actually very important, so that councillor is able to speak to them when they do come back to the body for ratification.
Thank you. Before I recognize Councillor Pelosi, I will acknowledge that while there are members who have made some comments already, I will tell you there are members of council who did zero participation in this. So I'm very mindful that as you consider wording of that it may well factor for those willing to, and because we cannot enforce any member of council, nor would we choose to make them participate. So my caution only. Councillor Pelosi, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that. And as one of the councillors who participated in many of the Mayor's Economic and Social Impact and Recovery Task Force calls, at times they seem to have great value, and other times it just seemed to make little headway, and wanting to make the best use of all the partners at the table. Wondering if the vision for this is to continue to do the virtual meetings or in person, and if you see the councillor's role in this, recognizing we weren't allowed to speak in the other ones and we were silent observers, if you see us facilitating these potential table sessions, equally participating in them, and like how do you specifically see our role in that of what we could bring to the table?
Thoughtful comments all so far. Any other comments or questions with respect to what is on the floor? Councillor Kayabaga.
Thank you. Through Mayor, I just wonder if Councillor Pelosi's question could be answered. It is a question that I also have. Like, what I know that in the creation of this, some of us were consulted. I don't know if all of the councillors were consulted, but some of us were consulted, and I want to know what our role is going to be in this, and how active our role is going to, and what can we contribute as some of the contributions we've made so far. Some of them didn't make it into this report. So I'm wondering, what is our participation level and what is required of us before we commit to anything?
I'm not going to comment as yet on that, but I did not ignore the councillor's question, Councillor Kayabaga. I just felt it was appropriate to hear a variety of views before I might ask the Deputy Mayor and myself to make some comments on that. It is correct, by the way, that members of council were participants or were invited to be participants. Some did, and a number did not, and which again is their choice, but I think it's a fair question. That's why I thought it would be appropriate to get the input from from all of colleagues who have some thoughts around this, and then we'll respond to some of those questions as well. Other comments, but thank you for that. Other comments or questions? Deputy Mayor, I wonder if I might ask you then, if I can be a little presumptuous here. There were questions about councillors' roles as it relates to this, which is why at the outset what I suggested that civic administration be directed to work with the mayor and council. But any thoughts or comments around this through you, and then I may add some of my own thoughts as well on this, if you'd care to comment.
Sure. I think the idea that councillors get more involved than they even were in the task force discussions is a great idea. And so people who've raised that as something that they want to accomplish, I think that would be wonderful. I think the discussions at the task force level, when they're at their best, they were driven by the folks who are dealing with the issues firsthand and informed by a lot of the work that councillors did to get those people involved in the task force discussions in the first place. I know as a counselor, like I was learning a ton from the people who are raising issues in real time, providing policy feedback on what was happening, identifying the issues that were of concern. But I think everyone who has been involved recognized that that model is not sustainable in the long run, nor is it needed. Is what it's needed now. What we need now is, I think, a broader group of people involved in a more in-depth way for a long period of time. You know, the recovery from the pandemic is not something that's going to happen quickly. It is going to require sustained effort from a lot of people, counselors and people in the community. And I think we need a lot of people from the community who were involved before to can stay involved. We need new people to be involved who were not involved in the previous discussions. And I think there's lots of opportunities for people to dig in and to get involved in those sector and issue tables. I think I would expect there to be counselors on all of them because we have a variety of expertise and experience, and people are going to want to bring different things to the tables. I think allowing counselors to choose what it is that they're getting involved in is the best way forward. I think what Councillor Lewis has suggested, which is, make sure that there's some expectation that counselors will be involved in the groups, is fine. I don't think we should be directing people like you have to be on this thing because you know stuff about that. I think we should leave it up to counselors about what it is they want to get involved in. And I think we can accomplish that. I also think it's important to let the group, like the sort of community recovery network group, when they first get together, to kind of hash this stuff out themselves and figure out what they could do. I don't want to presuppose that counselors have all the good ideas about how we should organize the work. And I think one of the strengths of the model that is being proposed by the city manager is that it's really relying heavily on the community for its expertise and its leadership ability. And it's not entirely driven by counselors or the city. And I definitely think that is what is needed right now, is a really across the entire community effort about what does recovery look like, where are we trying to go, how are we going to get there, deal with all the sort of issues that vary sector by sector in some depth. And it's not all going to be action by the city. As we know, so many of these things require action by different levels of government. So I think this is the right kind of model, generally speaking. I would love to see as many counselors get involved to whatever extent they want to in the work of these things. And I think this framework, which is what we're talking about here, is setting us up for that kind of participation. And certainly I don't think, when we were dealing with the first meetings, there was 70 people on a call that was an hour long, and it was very brief and people were limited in what they could say. And I don't think that's what we're going to be dealing with in these kind of discussions. I think they're going to be smaller numbers of people on more specific topics, take a bit more time, more opportunities to weigh in. And I think that that's what people should expect. At least that's what I'm hoping will happen if council decides to go in this direction. So I think this is the right framework. I think it gives a lot of flexibility for people to get involved as they would like to in as many of these things as they can. And we'll have to divide them up because certainly one or two people or 4 or 5 people even can't cover all these things that need to be done. There's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Thank you. Just to clarify, colleagues, for those who were participating in those calls, you will know the answer to this. To those who did not, you will not. This was not the mayor and deputy mayor show. The deputy mayor convened at the meeting in terms of coordinating and ensuring that everyone had a lot to say. We had very little to say as the politicals because we were there firstly to understand the the impacts on both business and the social service community in terms of our most vulnerable. The second part of that was then to talk in terms of recovery. But it wasn't for us ever, and I want to say this very clearly, ever, to direct what recovery looked like, to understand or direct what impact would be. So we were there to listen. And any and all colleagues had that opportunity to listen. And many of you did, and I think we all learned something as a result of that for those who did participate. So with that now, we are now taking this to a broader level so that staff has some responsibility, because this is never intended to be the mayor and deputy mayor show. This was always ever intended to be, how can we best understand and respond to the needs of our community at all levels? And you will see, I would suggest to you respectfully that you would find that the ones with the least to say, except for pointing out who was to speak next, were the deputy mayor and myself. And I only say that not defensively, but so that people understand that what we're now doing is we're taking this to the next level where it requires not just staff support, but all of your support. And I'm hopeful that if people are serious about what I heard around the table already, that there will be an active participation amongst colleagues around council if they choose to. But that is their call. We did not compel colleagues to take an active role. Many did. But now we're saying, and hence my slight amendment to call this the mayor and council, but if you look at what it says here in terms of on page 20, the proposed model led by the mayor, the forum will bring together a focused group of reps from business, not-for-profit institutions. And I would suggest to you that when you look at the next piece where it says, and other leaders with expertise or interest, including members of council. So this is by no means intended to be exclusive. And I would sincerely hope, and I would believe that staff is taking the responsibility for this, reporting back through, that council members will participate in the spirit that this is intended. And I sure as hope, heck, that anyone that had something to say tonight that did not participate might well. And for those who have not yet participated, might enjoy that opportunity to take a leadership role, because it's going to be stratified and segmented. And I'm not even sure we had all of that really super clear, but now it's going to be segmented in terms of areas of interest that we hope colleagues will participate in. So with all of that, the only thing that I would like to suggest, if I'm allowed through you, Deputy Mayor, to make an amendment to this, if I give you the chair, I'll make the amendment on this. So a slight amendment to this, if I can, and then open it up. Unless, actually, hold on a second, unless Councillor Lewis had included mayor and council to that piece. So I might just withdraw me from me and throw it back to Councillor Lewis, please.
Thank you, Mayor Holder, and with the incredible help of our awesome clerks team, who are always awesome, what I'd like to propose is two slight amendments, and it would be that in Part A, it be now read, the London Community Recovery Network be endorsed as a model to coordinate London's community recovery from COVID-19, including council membership on the sector issue themes discussion tables, and that Part B read, the civic administration be directed to work with the mayor and council to constitute the LCRN as soon as possible. All the other language remains the same. So we just include in Part A that council membership will be available on the tables as councillors choose to participate or not, and that Part B indicates that the work from our administration will be with the mayor and council in constituting this.
Do you have a seconder? Sorry, Councillor Hillier, I didn't see you on the short list here. Thank you very much. I see a thumb. Comments, Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, sure, and thank you for the amendment to both the mayor and Councillor Lewis and everybody else who suggested it. I did want to, having heard all the thoughts, comment generally on the recovery network as well. I think it's really important for us to have a model. And I think it's important for us to recognize that we might have to be flexible with that model, because the challenges that we face are challenges that we've never really faced before, as a council or a city or a business community or a not-for-profit community or even as individuals living in the city. So, you know, we've never really had a complete shutdown of the economy for all intents and purposes. We've never really had to restart that economy under such conditions, whether it's people who have to navigate, you know, teaching their kids at home this fall in a partial way, if that's the model, while trying to, you know, start up their businesses again or get to work or navigate transit with social distancing or whatever it is. It's going to be challenging. And so I think this is a really good framework to start from. I think it sounds like it has some broad-based buy-in from council. And if it doesn't, we should certainly talk through it now to ensure that we're on the same page, because there's going to be a lot of players and a lot of moving parts, and we're only going to be able to do so much, and we're probably going to be dealing with limited resources and lots of challenges through this process. And so that's going to require us to be nimble, and it's going to require us to be thoughtful, and it's going to require us to have really tough debates, and the framework is going to be what guides that. So I think the comments so far are really thoughtful, and I think the changes are appropriate, and I look forward to supporting this, and obviously the work ahead is the hard part, but I think, you know, we have to start somewhere, and this is a great place to start, and certainly we can adjust as needed.
Thank you. Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And a question through you to yourself or staff. Recognizing it's a 6 to 8 month short-term and then longer-term initiative, wondering if we have the appropriate staffing and any associated funding available at this point to implement this plan.
Thank you. Let's ask Ms. Livingston her thoughts on that, please.
Through your worship, thank you for the question. We have comprised an enterprise-wide team already to begin to support this work. So every service area has allocated someone to the team to support it. So we don't want this to be side of the desk work. We understand the importance of the recovery discussion, both from an economic and from a social perspective for London. So we are committed to that. So that team has been established. In terms of funding, certainly we will be able to support the work. The ideas will be put in front of council for those discussions, much like what happened in the April meeting around the relief measures. I would anticipate that the work of this group will be to identify those short-term ideas, and then there would be specific council decisions about them. But in terms of an ability to support the work, we have tried to organize ourselves to be able to do that.
Councillor Lehman, then. Thank you.
Thank you. And you know, I'm in favor of having you know, the city take the lead on this as we work our way a recovery out of the most serious pandemic of our generation. What I just asked staff to do is to provide a very clear mandate to those tables or subgroups that are being proposed. So, because it could be so all-encompassing on so many issues that a city faces, we could get drowned in so many issues. So I think the clearer the mandate is from staff, and as the organizational structure given to be very, very specific, because these are new waters. These are new folks that might never have participated in an exercise like this before. Well, including all of us, because we've never come out of a pandemic before. I just, that would be my suggestion to staff to help the tables and groups, et cetera, that will be contributing here.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions, colleagues? So this has been duly moved and seconded. Let's call the question. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabага.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And I'll vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Colleagues, we're working through the consent agenda. We're now at item 2.4, the second report of the Rapid Transit Implementation Working Group. Ms. Livingston, I wonder for an overview, you might wish to refer this to Ms. Scher, but I will start with you, please, and then we'll open it up to comments or questions that colleagues may have.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would refer it to Ms. Scher for brief comments.
Ms. Scher, do you have some brief thoughts?
Thank you, Your Worship. The recommendations coming from the Rapid Transit Implementation Working Group are that the information be received for information purposes only at this time, and it would be staff's intent to pursue longer-term mobility solutions through the upcoming Transportation Master Plan.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to move the motion to receive the report. I appreciate the comments and the work that the working group did.
Do we have a thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Pelosa. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Deputy Mayor.
Could we have it with the exception of the 3.2 section, which 3 councillors have declared a pecuniary interest on? We can deal with that and then deal with the remainder.
So a slight exclusion there, colleagues. I'm sure that'll get the support of the mover and seconder. Any other comments with all except 3.2? Seeing none, we'll call the question on all but 3.2. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabага.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
So colleagues, now we will move to to receive the report on item 3.2 of the North Corridor Transit Option, noting that we have 3 who may recuse themselves. So shall we go through that, please, when we are ready? Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabага.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And I vote yes, but I just want to acknowledge the 3 who have been noted. Deputy Mayor Helmer? Recuse? Councillor Morgan?
Abstain.
Abstain. And Councillor Lehman?
Abstain.
Okay, so noted. Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 12-0 with 3 recused.
Thank you. Colleagues, I will move to the scheduled items 3.1. We have a public participation meeting. The good news is we are not early. This is not to be heard before 4:05. And this has to do with the development charges update, covering report and proposed bylaw. I do believe we will have a presentation under the PPM. So I will look to So let's hear from our finance folks. Ms. Barbone, would you like to make a presentation, please?
Yes, thank you through the chair. So we began this process and quite a while back related to updating the information with respect to Bill 108 at that time. And since that time, we've had a number of changes, and we worked very closely with our external stakeholders as we've worked through this development charge study update. So I'm going to pass the floor over to Mr. Yeomans, who's going to walk through the presentation that is contained within your agenda package.
Well, thank you, Ms. Barbon. It's a pleasure to be with you all tonight. So it has been a little over a year since we were last with you for the approval of the 2019 DC study. As Ms. Barbon mentioned, there have been a number of items that I'm going to highlight for you tonight that have occurred, and that's why we're tabling the report with you. So we're going to start on slide number 2 tonight. I'm going to give you a quick development charges refresher for the benefit of our PPM. I'll give you also an overview of the 2021 DC study and the scope of the changes that are being proposed. We'll move to a summary of the proposed DC rates and the municipal comparators, which are always helpful for our discussions. And then I'll conclude with the timeline and next steps as we continue our process towards council consideration of the draft bylaw and background study. If we move to the next slide, I think this is something that you'll all be familiar with seeing. There's a number of things that we're considering through a development charges background study. The 2021 update is no different for that. A DC study really is a balancing act of a number of perspectives that we hear. You'll see here maximizing new opportunities for growth. So this is for homes and businesses, new opportunities there. A request to minimize additional cost to home buyers and to ratepayers as well. So this goes to the reasonableness of the rates that we charge for development charges. Making sure that we have sufficient recovery to fund our capital programs. We want to make sure that we've got enough money in our reserve funds to provide the infrastructure that we need to support growth. And finally, the cardinal principle for development charges matters is that growth pays for growth, and the study needs to ensure that. Moving to the next slide. So this is a graphical illustration in a very simplistic way of how you do a DC rate calculation. There's a number of factors and variables that are involved in that, as you can see. For the numerator side, when we're looking at the net projects for recovery, we're looking at a number of factors like the timing of projects that impacts the scope of DC recovery. You have the timing of projects, so when is the infrastructure actually needed as well, so that has implications for cash flows. You have the deductions that are required by the Development Charges Act, so they get factored in as well. And then you take that and divide it by the growth that's occurring for population in square meters, depending on whether it's residential or non-residential, which is informed by the splits by development type, so residential, commercial, industrial, and institutional, and also the amount of forecasted units and space for the period as well. So that's the growth that's actually triggering the work. Moving to the next slide. So why are we here? Why do we need to have this update at this time? So since we completed the study, Bill 108 really has been a key force that shaped the development charges world. You'll recall we've been before you already with a few items related to Bill 108, and we're continuing that tonight. There are a number of items that have been proclaimed, so we're factoring that into the DC study. There are a number of items that are pending as well that I'll highlight too that are important for consideration as we continue to move forward. We also now know the details related to the federal and provincial funding for the transportation projects for council's ask, and so that's been factored into the study as well. So we're really making sure that the study and the bylaw that you're going to be approving is compliant with the Development Charges Act going forward. I would recall this a technical update then to the 2019 DC study, and we've scoped the report and the background study and bylaw that's before you as such. Moving then to the next slide. So there's a number of check marks that you'll see here of items that have been factored in already. Council, if you'll recall, approved several changes this spring related to DC rates being frozen at an earlier point in time. So this is frozen at either site plan or at rezoning. If neither of those are occurring, then DCs are actually calculated at the time of building permit issuance, just like in the old regime. We're also charging interest. So council approved an interest policy related to that. Which the frozen period lasts for a 2-year period, which is important to note as well. So the province has really introduced a sort of a move it or lose it kind of provision for the changes that they made to try to incent growth and development in the province. And then finally, there's the deferred types of development that have been factored in as well. If you recall, there's deferrals that have been introduced for for rental, nonprofit housing, and for institutional development as well. Moving to the next slide. So this is highlighting the elements of the study that we factored into the draft, but haven't yet been proclaimed through legislation, which we are anticipating actually based on some recent announcements by the province to occur before the October date, which is obviously good news. The first is that the province has changed the approach for development charges. Before, they had a list of services that you couldn't actually apply to recover a DC for. Instead, they've flipped it and they've actually prescribed a list now of services for which DCs are eligible for capital recovery. So that's a pretty significant change. I have highlighted in here as well that based on recent provincial proposed changes, it would mean that what you approved in your 2019 DC study in terms of the scope of services for recovery would be maintained through this 2021 DC study. The other important change is that there was a mandatory 10% deduction in the amount of recoverable costs that was made for certain soft services as they're termed. That's been removed as well with the provincial changes too. Those aren't in force in effect yet, but we have factored those into the study. So as I mentioned last week, the province introduced omnibus legislation related to COVID recovery. It included development charges pieces and amendments to the Act. It's in first reading right now, but we're anticipating that this will continue to move forward, and it factors in these elements as well that are quite important to our community. If we move to the next slide, it's a graphic representation of what we've been working with our stakeholders on over the last several months. So this DC study is, of course, incorporated the Bill 108 changes that I've mentioned. We've also reviewed our growth projections and the associated infrastructure, working with our consultants to make sure that they're current as well and to make sure that they're included with the study. We've incorporated the federal and provincial transit funding and the adjustments to be made associated with that. When we did the 2019 DC study, we didn't have all the details at the time, but now we do, so we can actually include those. We've also updated for a number of environmental assessments that have occurred, in particular the Dingman EA for the southwest portion of the city. A number of stormwater management projects were adjusted related to that. We have run a full GMIS as part of this DC update as well. We've incorporated that feedback too. And then we've also received comments from our stakeholders related to COVID-19, and we've done our best to reflect those comments and concerns in this study as well. We've also updated our financial assumptions, our financing assumptions related to the cost of borrowing and interest on the reserve funds as well. So that's updated to be current with what we're seeing in the market. And then finally, we've made adjustments to our recovery period and our service standards. So given that this is an update to the previous study, we've gone from a 20-year recovery period to an 18-year recovery period. So we've seen a number of adjustments related to the projects and also the growth that's included in the 2021 DC update related to that. If we move to the next slide then, these are the drafted DC rates for single and semi-detached housing that are before you here. We've broken it down based on hard services. So this is things like water and wastewater, stormwater, transportation, and then soft services, which is parks and recreation, libraries, transit, services like that. So you can see the current 2020 DC rate that's in place right now, which is pretty well $34,000. With what's before you in draft, we're looking at $34,158, which represents a 0.6% increase over the rate that's currently in force and effect. I will note that if this was approved and these rates came into force January 1st, 2021, we wouldn't actually be indexing the rates because we've updated the costs to be current in 2021 dollars. If we go to the next slide, you can see here, these are the draft rates in a similar format for institutional, commercial, and industrial. You are seeing a slight increase for commercial and institutional and a decrease for industrial based on the modeling that we did for our rates. Moving then to the next slide. So this is the comparison. It's a quick comparison of large urban municipalities that are similar to London. When we do these comparatives, we separate out two elements of our DC rate. We separate out a base rate, which is general services that we charge for, and then we exclude stormwater management and highlight that separately. The reason we do that is because there's a large number of the larger urbans that don't actually recover for stormwater management through their development charge rates. They generally have that as a local service, or they charge it through other means. So we want to make sure that distinction is made. And what you can see here is that our base DC is lower than most municipalities of our size, so we are quite competitive. If we then move to the next slide, so this is the local comparators for municipalities close to us. Again, we're separating out our base rate here from stormwater, and we also then separate out major roads as well. London, of course, being the large community that it is, has considerable roads costs that are involved with accommodating growth in our city. The smaller communities don't have as many of these costs, and so that's why you see a bit of a difference here. So you can see that our base rate, though, is generally consistent with municipalities surrounding us. So if we go to the next slide, as Ms. Barbon mentioned at the beginning, we are before you today for tabling this draft bylaw and background study and for our public participation meeting. From there, we'll be moving forward to October 20th, and we'll be before you again to incorporate the feedback we've received and another report that will be coming forward. And council will have the opportunity to deliberate on the bylaw and background study at that time. Should council then wish to approve the DC bylaw and background study, that would be on October 27th, my apologies. And then the effective date of the bylaw would be January 1st of next year. I do have an important disclaimer here, though, that we still are working through the elements related to the eligible services and the 10% discount, as I mentioned in my presentation as well. So we'll be reporting back to you in October about that. We do have two consultants that are with us as well tonight, Scott Johnson from IBI Group and Julius Saraki from Henson, to perhaps answer any questions that you may have. And I also just want to conclude by thanking the DC stakeholders for once again engaging with us on this update, and to the large staff team throughout the corporation that's been working very hard on this. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I will turn things back to you and welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Yeoman. I wonder if there are questions for him that we may address specifically. Councillor Turner.
Your Worship, just since this is a public participation meeting, perhaps we'd like to hear from the public, and then we could go to our debating questions.
What's your pleasure? What's the pleasure of the colleagues? We can certainly go to PPM first, but I thought it would be the pleasure of colleagues if they have specific questions, because it's fresh on their mind specific to that, but I'm at your pleasure. So any questions, Mr. Yeomans? Councillor Hopkins.
I was just going to suggest that we open up the PPM. I would like to hear from the community.
Well, then let's do that then. Absolutely. I'll look for a motion to open public participation, moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Turner. We'll call the question. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy. Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa. Has stepped out. Councillor Kayablaga.
Yeah.
Councillor Hillier. Thank you.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
So I'll look for any individuals from the public who would like to participate in our PPM. Do we have any? You see one working to the microphone. I would ask said individual, who some of us know well and some weller than others, to identify himself, and I would note that we would provide 5 minutes for commentary. Mr. Wallace, please go ahead.
Thank you. It's Mike Wallace, representing the London Development Institute. First of all, it's really nice to be back in City Hall. You guys may not think so, but I do. And we appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today about at this PPM. First of all, we want to thank Ms. Barbon and her team and the development finance team for the work that they've done on this report. We met on a very regular basis. They were very receptive to the discussion that we had in terms of the issues that we were having, and were really good, to be honest with you, of providing us with the information that we needed to move forward. We are 100% support of the report that's in front of you. We've analyzed it this way and back to make sure we're okay with what's being proposed. We do recognize, obviously, particularly with Bill 197 last week, that there's still going to be more work to be done on this issue. They want me to move closer, so I look even better on TV. So there you go. So we are in favor of tonight's report. As an organization, LDI is more than willing to continue to work with city staff on DC issues, of course, as they come forward. You'll see from we were waiting for what was going to happen with the community benefits program. It was just announced last Thursday, I believe, in Bill 197, and it has changed considerably from where we thought it was going to go. And there are a number of other changes that will need to be discussed, obviously. But going forward for January 1st, we are happy with the discussion that we had, the results of that discussion, the reports from the consultants that were hired to be able to provide staff with that direction. We do want to make sure that when this comes back, that it's, and I don't know how things are decided at the city, but we make sure it's not a consent item so that we can have a delegation to it if required, because the rules here are no delegations to the vast majority of consent items. So we want to make sure, because as Mr. Yeoman has indicated, there may still be some changes that need to be made based on the information that still needs to be gathered. So with that, we would be happy to answer any questions. I would say, though, if you don't mind, that it would have been great to have your questions to your staff on this so that we would be able to help respond to it from our perspective. But because we don't know what your questions were, we can't do that. So if after tonight's meeting, you may hear from me based on some of the questions that you have asked your staff, what our perspective may be. With that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wallace. That's why more learned members of council than me have chosen to do this in the right order. So we thank you for that. And I would ask if there are any other individuals wishing to speak at our public participation meeting. Do we have any other?
Was there any questions of me? No? If there's
no,
not, I have
that
one
is,
other
that's,
point. I just don't want to make one other point, Mr. Mayor.
You're still within your time. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to thank you for the public meeting. Yeah, I know it's been a struggle in a sense to get public meetings up and operating as a council, but for us, I want to thank you for today, not only today's public meeting, but I know you're having 2 public meetings this week at PEC, and as part of the economic recovery, which you have been just talking about in the last hour, our industry wants to be part of that economic recovery, and we can be part of that economic recovery for London. And respectfully, we would hope that we'd be able to see a couple of public meeting opportunities at PEC again in August. So we really thank you for one of the ones who were the loudest complaining about not getting these up and operating. I want to be the first one to thank you for having them operating, so that and they have been working well. I've been watching all the PEC meetings as they've been going forward over the last little while, and we do appreciate the effort that you and staff have made to make these happen. Thank you.
So noted. Thanks very much, Mr. Wallace. Any other comments from our committee rooms? Please come forward.
One more?
Yes, thank you. I would ask the individual to please come forward, introduce yourself by your name as you wish, and we provide you with 5 minutes. Thanks very much. Please go ahead.
Okay, there was other people here, but they left. My understanding is that Bill 108 and the new ominous Bill 197 are environmental protection deregulation bills and a restraint on municipal jurisdiction to plan and fund their communities going forward. My understanding is that municipalities must rationalize all development charges and community benefit charges going forward, and that these decisions can be challenged by a developer at the local planning appeal tribunal, undercutting community needs as developers are not community representatives. I recognize that there are environmental benefits to intensification if it is properly planned, but in many cases it's not. And the consequences often result in harsher living and a loss of intrinsic values that make high density living easier. Therefore, I'm asking that any strategic growth plan rationalizing development charges and community benefit charges include changes that offset the negative consequences that come with intensification and support other in-place strategies such as the urban forestry strategy, the climate change strategy, parks planning, and issues such as more traffic, more air and water pollution, noise pollution, congestion, open spaces, and tree canopy requirements on all new developments. I see this as an opportunity to offset the deregulation of environmental protection laws through direct local action by municipalities. It's about balance and taking seriously the opportunity to create livable cities in real terms and weave as a priority these issues that have a direct and profound impact on livability. This in turn will influence employment and housing. Finally, in speaking to the office, I spoke at length to the minister's office, Stephen Clark. And I learned that municipalities have always had the opportunity to request greater parkland dedication from each new development through section 42, subsection 3, entitled Alternative Requirements of the Planning Act. I am disappointed that this city has never utilized this section of the Planning Act to ensure the preservation of green space, especially in the downtown core. The goal shouldn't be just to build housing, but good housing, and that provides good living environments. And I'm really disappointed that staff talked a lot about stakeholders, but the public has been shut out of those tables and those conversations. Community activists weren't involved. I consider myself a stakeholder. I consider my neighbor a stakeholder. And yet here I am at a public meeting where I never got to see a presentation. There's no agendas here for me to look at. I looked at it online, but it's not the same. I don't have that opportunity. I don't get to sit at the table. I just get 5 minutes. And this is a really big deal. Bill 108 combined with Bill 197 is going to reshape how these communities go forward. And I don't take this issue lightly at all. I'm asking that the public be at those tables, that staff talk to the public, and that environmental protection be supplemented in how we go forward and decide on community benefit charges and development charges. Sorry, I'm having a hard time with this mass. I'm also asking that any growth plan strategy remove all development subsidies that burden individual homeowners, such as water consumption subsidies. Currently, individual homeowners subsidize water rates for both industry and multi-residential buildings, and yet we're not at the table having a proper discussion. And I expect that this council make an effort and direct staff to start talking to at least neighborhood associations on how this should go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'd like your name on the record, could I just ask you to provide it if you wish?
Sure, it's Anna Maria Velastro, 133 John Street, Unit 1, N6A1, N7. And I'm here all the time, but I didn't hear any welcoming notes for me when I came up to speak. Thank you.
Well, let me provide a welcome. We had one formally pre-registered speaker, but it's you're always welcome to attend, and we are grateful for that attendance. Thank you very much. Do we have anyone else who wishes to speak at our people?
There's no one currently in the room which is to speak.
Thank you very much. Then I'll look for a motion to close the PPM discussion. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Van Meerbergen. We'll call the vote. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosi.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yeah.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Thanks very much. Colleagues, we heard a presentation from Mr. Yeomans, and I will turn this over to Ms. Barbone if you have any other comments. If not, we'll open up to comments or questions, and then we'll look for a motion to receive. Ms. Barbone?
Actually, Your Worship, I'll take it from here. If I could, I'd just like to provide some comments based on the stakeholder comments that were made just a few moments ago. Greatly appreciate the input that was provided. Yes, Bill 108 and the draft legislation that was tabled last week are fairly significant changes, obviously, in the DC world related to CBCs as well. We'll be providing you with an update report on that once we've had a chance to digest the proposed changes. At our first glance, though, we are seeing good things for our community writ large in terms of the DC world. The province has proposed expanding the scope of services than they originally proposed for DC recovery, which is great news. They've also modified the CBC regime so that it's not fully tied to the DC study, so that you can actually charge a CBC for DC related items. It can't be for the same infrastructure, but it can be for something's different that related to service level increases, which is pretty interesting. They've also decoupled the parkland requirement from the CBC as well, so you can maintain a separate parkland dedication bylaw and a CBC as well too. So good news there as well. Just first in the comments about appeals to LPAT. So the DC study has always been appealable to LPAT by any member of the community. The proposed CBC study would be as well, should council adopt one in the future. I just want to also highlight that there are a few things in here that are really important related to intensification. So as it was raised, the urban forestry strategy is funded through development charges, and it's factored in as well. Parks and recreation is obviously very important to all of our community, no matter where you're growing in the city. And we do have a number of intensification related parks projects that are included in the background study that were carried over from the 2019 DC study as well. And then finally, related to the stakeholder group that we have, it does include 2 representatives from the Urban League who are very active in our study as well, and we thank them very much for their participation.
Thanks very much. Comments or questions for Mr. Yeoman? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Through the mayor, to either Mr. Yeoman or potentially one of the consultants from Hemson, I did have a chance to look in the 2021 background study update. I see there's some analysis around the splits between different kinds of housing units. This is something we've discussed in the lead up to the 2019 DC study, and at various times at Planning Committee when we have building permit reports come forward. I'm sure the staff are tired of me asking about it. I just wonder if you wanted to address that directly in terms of the split between low density residential, medium density residential, and then higher density residential. I see that there's some helpful analysis in the actual update itself, and I just wonder if you want to talk about it.
Mr. Yeoman.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to answer that. That analysis that's included in the background study was provided by Watson Associates, who are our growth projections consultants. They unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight. If you'd like to have further dialogue with them, we're happy to bring them forward in October. As you mentioned, we did have them do a review of the growth projections that they completed in 2018. They have noted that they are seeing a bit of a change in terms of the splits that have been noted by a number of councillors and a number of our reports that we've brought forward. They have concluded, though, in terms of looking at a 20-year projection, a 20-year recovery period, that they believe that they're minor at this point, although they're continuing to monitor them. They also do note that, if you can believe it, we're going to be starting our 2024 DC study in the very near future. And at that point, when we have the 2021 census data, we'll have a very good baseline to be further reviewing the growth splits that we have for residential and for all of our other components of growth.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Hopkins, did I see your hand up?
Yes, thank you for recognizing me, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Yeoman, for the presentation. I always feel I need a course every year on DCs. It just takes me a while to understand it. And I think with the changes that the provincial government is proposing, that some of them have come into effect, but some more still need to come forward. I think it's something that we all have to try to understand as we make decisions as we go along. So thank you for the presentation. I always like to hear growth pays for growth. I think that's a really important part. I'd like to make a comment on Mr. Wallace's comment about the opportunities to still further discuss this. So we know a report's coming in October. We know legislation will be coming forward in October. But what is or are there any concerns? We hear some good things happening with the changes, but what is missing? What should we be looking for that really will make changes in how we do this? This is a technical report to some degree, but also any concerns about implementing all this too. Just imagine what staff have to deal with and how that all is unfolded. So a couple questions there, but more or less dealing with things still to come, the implementation, and what should we be really looking at on our radar with these changes?
Mr. Yeoman.
Through your worship. So yes, there are a number of proposed changes that would be impactful for this DC update. A large number of them, though, would relate to the future development charges study for 2024. Right now, the province, based on the draft legislation, has actually included things like affordable housing and long-term care as potential areas for recovery, which their previous proposals did not include as well. What would be impactful for this study, though, is if the province reverted to their original proposals that actually had stripped out parks and recreation and libraries from the DC regime. We're not anticipating that to occur. That would be fairly significant for all municipalities throughout Ontario. Would also not fully align with their proposed changes for the community benefits charge as well. So that's why we've highlighted them fairly significant in this. That and the 10% discount that they've removed as well would be impactful for this DC study, and we would update and reflect that with the October report.
Councillor?
Thank you for that. And just getting back to that other question I had about implementation, will there be time needed, or how, when the province comes out with the recommendation, then what does that process look like? Or do we know anything about that yet, or is that still to come?
Mr. Yeoman?
Through you, your chair, or Mr. Chair, we don't have any information on the timeline yet for this. Given that it's part of the COVID omnibus bill, though, I would anticipate the province is going to move pretty quickly with it. The province will consider it through the legislature. They will then move to approve it through that process. It will then receive royal assent and then be proclaimed as well. And we don't have any timelines in terms of when the royal assent would occur and when the proclamation would occur as well. So that's something we'll be closely monitoring. If we are seeing that it is going to be later than we anticipated, then we'll be adjusting our timeline accordingly, and we'll be advising council.
Councillor Hopkins? Thank you. I have Councillor Turner next.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Yeoman, for the presentation and the report. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Helmer, for asking the building splits, which was going to be top of my list there. Can always count on us to ask those, Mr. Yeoman. So I have a few questions. I mean, ultimately, DC's plays this balance, and you showed the seesaw there at the beginning. I mean, where DCs can be recovered, it means that those costs for services or whatever the infrastructure is associated with it aren't recovered through taxes. And so that's really the question of who pays for it, and that's where we get to the growth pays for growth component. There are a number of things that are growth related, however, that are not recovered through DCs, and the changes to Bill 10, or the changes imposed by Bill 108 leaves us short in some places, and with the opportunity to take advantage of other places. So I wonder, for example, why we wouldn't take full advantage of those opportunities. We just had a fairly protracted discussion about ambulance services, for example. And probably one of the larger cost drivers associated with ambulance services is some of that infrastructure associated with expansion, headquarters and stations and things like that. Could you comment a little bit about that? And I think that there's a little bit of a nuance there too, because of the service delivery agent being the county and the city not holding those assets themselves. So are those eligible, or is that a challenge for us?
Mr. Yeoman? Mr. Yeoman, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My apologies. My connection is unstable right now, which is always helpful. Through you, it's a very good question. And one we did consider quite a bit when we were looking at the scope for this update. What's involved with a number of these other services that we haven't recovered for in the past is we do have to do a growth-based infrastructure needs assessment, which can be a little bit different than some of the assessments that have been done by some of these services in the past. They generally take between 1 and 2 years to complete by the time they consider the growth projections and work their way through. So we didn't feel that we had enough time to sufficiently be before you with this update to have DC rates in place for January 1st. Also making sure we're incorporating the Bill 108 changes to make sure that we're in alignment with the Act coming forward. So we're going to be working with those stakeholders, those internal and agency boards and commission stakeholders over the coming years as we work towards the 2024 DC study. If you'll recall, when we concluded our 2019 DC study, we did have a number of other services that we identified that we were going to be looking at with that study as well. So we're going to be continuing with those discussions and that analysis, assuming the province does give the scope that they're proposing currently.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you. That's helpful. That's I recognize some of the challenges in having that background information being really important. I think that kind of sets the table for the 2024, and since we're at the outset of that very shortly. In one of your graphs, you identified where a number of municipalities that had little asterisks beside it and identified that they used area ratings. The City of London doesn't currently do that. And that was, I think, from previous discussion and in part reflection of the difficulty and complexity associated with calculating area ratings. But that seems like really important work that we need to do and have contemplated for the 2024 study. I know that may be a little outside of the realm of the report that's in front of us today, but I think I'm bridging off of some of the other points in here that would have been nice to have seen in the update, such as ambulance services or otherwise, where we can do cost recovery so that at least we net out, right? It's that if we're losing opportunities in some place, that we're taking advantage of the opportunities on the other, and that we use the tools that are available to us, such as area rating, which does have a fair impact, theoretically at least, on containing growth and sprawl and helping to advantage and incentivize intensification versus greenfield development. Another question I had, I didn't have a chance, my apologies, to get through the background study, but my question would be about rapid transit and the impact associated with that, with the change in direction. The 19 study was predicated on 5 routes. The 2021 has to reflect the 3 routes. The 2024 will have to reflect any of the changes that are associated with the north and west legs. So could you comment on that a little bit and what the impact was and what the potential impact is on the 2024, and if we need to be live to anything in this as the new bylaw comes forward in October or whenever it is.
Mr. Yeoman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So an excellent question as well. We have, as I mentioned, reviewed and included some updates in the 2021 update related to rapid transit. It was related to the amount of funding and the deductions that are required associated with that when we do our rate calculation models. We also reviewed the benefit to existing shares as well, which was a carryover because we didn't have sufficient information with the 2019 study to do that as well. That had a very minor impact. Generally, it was consistent with the 2019 DC study, which was good to see. We have included the north and west legs in this development charges background study consistent with the transportation master plan that has been previously approved. For the 2024 DC study, we of course be having another transportation master plan like we do for all of our services, which will be considering the growth related infrastructure that's required. We'll be considering those matters, and then we will be implementing transportation master plan decisions through the next DC study.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you. Perhaps that might be important information on the rapid transit specific components and the financing associated with it on DCs as information that would be helpful to refer to the Rapid Transit Implementation Working Group. I think that would be really important for us and the Implementation Working Group to have a sense of what financial impacts are as decisions are being made. And if that information was assembled for this background study for the update, I think that if it can be parsed out, would be really helpful.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor?
That's all I have for right now.
Thanks very much. Any other comments or questions for Mr. Yeoman? I have one. I'd like to turn this over to the Deputy Mayor so that I might ask a question, please.
I'm just checking the speakers list and I have the mayor. Go ahead.
How wise are you and thoughtful? Thanks very much. I understand that Mr. Yeoman, that there was reference made to ambulance service already, but I note that when I looked at the details of our development charges, that long-term care, electrical power services, and ambulance are proposed by legislation to be eligible for DCs, but haven't been included in our 2021 DC study update. You may have referenced part of that when you said there may not be sufficient time for infrastructure assessment in terms of the broader base needs. But so my question would be, why not first? And I guess secondly, unless I've misread this, then would this be considered for 2024 review going forward?
Thank you, through the Deputy Mayor, to your worship. Yes, so we have, as I mentioned, only included the scope of services that we're currently recovering for through the development charges study and through the bylaw. So we have scoped it to that. We haven't considered additional services at this time. We still don't fully know what the province is going to be permitting in terms of eligible services going forward. So that's one hurdle that we have to go through. The other is then making sure that we have sufficient time to do a rigorous study of the growth space needs. As I mentioned, development charges background studies are appealable to LPAT. So it's incredibly important, first of all, that we're providing counsel with appropriate and professional recommendations, but also that we can defend our background study on the event of an appeal as well, which is obviously very important. So there's a lot of rigor behind DC requirements that are identified in the Act. If we were to push this off and then actually consider those, we would essentially be getting into the timetable of the 2024 DC study. We would also not have the benefit of the 2021 census to actually have that growth information reflected. So we'd be essentially working off older information as we got closer to that period. So it's our recommendation right now to approve the update. We're going to then very soon commence the 2024 DC study, which will be progressing based on all of that information, and it will be considering the additional services. We will bring forward a report, as we always do, to council to initiate the new background study for 2024. It will include some proposed services that we'll be looking at, and council, of course, has the option of giving us direction on what they would like us to be looking at for that study.
So through the chair, it seems to me it is clear, at least what I've read to this point, what are eligible services. Whether we have time to factor it into 2021, I think it's clear we do not in terms of our study update. But I just want to be clear that on a go-forward basis that we might anticipate in our next review that we would factor in those known eligible services, which again, by what I have read, includes long-term care, public health, electrical power services, and ambulance services. So it would be my sense that that would be part of the next review. And I just want to confirm from our perspective, I get why not now, but that it would be the next time. And is that your view as well, Mr. Yeoman?
Mr. Yeoman, go ahead, and I'm just looking to see if there's any speakers after the mayor. Go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, through you. So that is correct, Your Worship. If you'll recall that we did introduce 2 new services with the 2019 DC study. So we introduced waste diversion and operation centers as well, which was pretty historic for the city. It's been a number of years that we have introduced new services. Those were supported as well by our stakeholder committee too. And we of course be having very involved discussions with them related to any new proposed services for DC recovery as well.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to take it back when you're ready.
Mayor, back over to you, Mayor. Go ahead.
Thanks very much. Any other comments or questions for Mr. Yeoman or Ms. Barbon? See none, I will look for a motion to receive said report. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Seeing no other comments or questions, we'll call the vote. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosi.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabага.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
So colleagues, we have a couple of items for direction, which I'm not certain would take particularly long, but there are a couple of questions of import. One is an added, and the second will be an added. And I wonder if I could indulge the committee to take a very hard 8-minute break for pause, reflection, and relief. And if that's the case, I would look for a motion to proceed. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Can we do a hand vote? All those in favor? Let's do a sharp hard 8 minutes. We'll see you back at 6:53. Thanks very much.
I have 8 minutes.
That is 8 minutes.
Water jug we use for the water.
Purple one?
Hey, Van Holst, I think you're not on mute.
Where's the girl?
Van Holst, I think you're not on mute.
Is she out there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Councillor Van Holst, you're not on mute.
Colleagues, it now being 8 minutes, 37 seconds, I'm going to move to items for direction. I'll turn your attention to 4.1, where we have a resignation from Eldon House Board of Directors. And I will look for a motion to accept said resignation. Is there a mover? Councillor Pelosi, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. Comments, questions? Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just briefly, recognizing this individual had made their resignation intent in February and the board accepted it in May. Just wondering if we know why there was such a delay of months, if this is normal as per their meeting cycle, or what's happened here?
I'm not sure who might be able to respond to that. I do not have that answer, Councillor. I'm not sure if there's anyone that might. Clerk, do you have some comment on that?
Thank you, through the chair. My only comment would be that the resignation appeared on an agenda as soon as we received notice of it. Thank you.
It would appear that's all we know at this point. Any other comments or questions? Then to accept that, the resignation, and by the way, with our thanks, I want to add that, if I might, to our board member who stepped away. We'll call the question. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yeah.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosi.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
The question then becomes, colleagues, knowing that there is now a vacancy on that particular board of Eldon House, we have no direction from Eldon House, nor would I imagine we would. What is the pleasure of the board in terms of considering someone to fill that role? And I say that because we have had some issues with respect to other board roles being filled. We do not have to act at this point, but if there's some opinions as to process, then I would be open to any suggestions board members have. Are there any thoughts or comments? Or do we wish to have this deferred to the next meeting? Councillor Turner, you are 4 ways up. I just saw you sideways, upside down, and I won't comment further. Comments, or do you wish to have that deferred till our next meeting? I'm at your pleasure, colleagues. Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Without a formal motion, can we just ask civic staff to reach out to see how they'd like to proceed, recognizing even this resignation didn't come from staff, it came from the board member themselves.
Acknowledged. Did you have a seconder for that? Or is that a
possible
suggestion at this point?
Can we just do without a motion that someone finds out what they're up to?
I'll look to the clerk for that, for clarity.
Under the current terms of reference, it would be up to council to appoint a new member there, not for the board to make a recommendation in that regard. We could reach out, though, to see if there's a specific skill set that they're looking for or any criteria.
Councillor?
Yes, I would support what Ms. Westlake Power said.
So what I'm hearing is a referral back to staff to reach out to Eldon House to determine if there are any specific skill sets, and then take some direction accordingly. Do you have a seconder for that? And then we can have a discussion around that. Councillor Lewis, any other comments or questions? I'm seeing none, so let's call the question. Soon. Really soon. I'll ask the clerk to read the motion as it is in front of us, please.
The motion reads that staff be directed to consult with the current Eldon House Board with respect to potential membership requirements and undertake candidate recruitment for consideration accordingly.
Thank you. So then now we will call the vote. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Thanks very much, colleagues. Under 4.2, we have from the Argyle Business Improvement Association, both a resignation from the association and confirmation of 2 appointments. I'll look for a mover to accept both. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Comments, questions? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to specifically thank Randy and the Argyle BIA Board for the work that they've done to very quickly recruit new candidates to fill the 2 vacancies. We have had some challenges with corporate restructuring as a result of COVID and some changes so people who are no longer working in the area have tendered their resignations, but we have 2 people with significant experience in the neighborhood and in the business community stepping forward to fill those gaps. Both attended a previous meeting to get their feet wet and introduce themselves to the board, and we're very comfortable that these 2 individuals will serve very well.
Thank you. Any other comments? Motion duly moved and seconded. We will call the question soon. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan. Thank you. Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
It's late. Yeah. Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yeah.
Councillor Hilliard.
Yes.
I'll vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Colleagues, thank you, colleagues. I'll turn your attention now to an added item 5.1 on the agenda, making anti-racism a strategic priority. Perhaps I could turn this over to the Deputy Mayor for thoughts or comments, unless we want to put this over to staff.
No, I think it's best to hear from Councillor Kayabaga, who is the lead signature on the letter.
Let's hear from lead signature writer, Councillor Kayabaga. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Helmer and Mayor. So I think this motion follows up with the previous motion that we had. And so in order to address structural racism in this city, we must take a deeper look at policies. Institutional racism is embedded as a normal practice within society and in so many organizations that it has led to discrimination in housing, healthcare, political power, employment, and more. If we want to be leaders in doing anti-racist work, we must be active and be willing to engage in every single policy and how it affects marginalized communities, Indigenous and Black communities. I've decided to move this motion to ask that every single service area at the City of London has an anti-racism lens. And I believe that moving forward, we have to go from just words and go into action. We have to take a deeper look at the practices that we have here at the corporation and beyond and across the city. But we most certainly have to start within the corporation and look at the way that we budget, allocate, the way that we planning, engineering, transportation, and any other service area that the city has to offer. The work towards eradicating racism and tracking, having a tracking system, a metric tracking system, which would essentially report to SPPCs, that is what this motion is looking to achieve. We know that we have acknowledged that systemic racism exists here in London, and that was the first step. And now it's time that we take the next step, which is to put in the work to ensure fairness, justice, equity within the entire community. And I think Councillor Sally is going to second the motion, but I'm thankful for Deputy Mayor Helmer for the support and the mayor as well.
Thanks very much. Do we have a seconder in Councillor Sally, and do you wish to make any comments as well?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to second the motion. I think this is important work. I'm glad yourself, Mayor Holder, and Deputy Mayor Helmer provided leadership and support on this. I think we continue to need to do more work, and as I mentioned early on, some weeks ago, that there's a lot of motions that will come, and I think this is kind of one motion that kind of wraps a lot of what is still needed to be done to close some of those gaps. So I hope my colleagues will support this motion. I think it's an important step in the right direction.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Comments or questions? Councillor Turner.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody who put this forward. I think it's quite appropriate. I don't think there should be any question or debate, really. I think it just makes sense. The clause B about reporting to SPPC, I think makes a lot of sense as well. The only concern I would have with that is the frequency of SPPC and whether it has the frequency in order to be able to address the reports of DIAC in a timely manner. But that's a trivial thing as compared to being able to elevate it to the status of having the attention of council on the whole. So perhaps, I don't know, there's a question in there and I'm not quite sure who it's for, but if there's a way to at least make sure that the DIAC reports are addressed and elevated quickly so that they don't have to be too long.
Well, Councillor Turner, it's a thoughtful question for comment. Let's turn to the clerk for her thoughts on this.
Thank you through the chair. You'll recall that with the meeting schedule that was approved very recently by council, the meeting cycles, all of the standing committees will meet in advance of the council meeting. So they're all meeting regularly on a 3-week rotation. So there shouldn't be any delay.
Councillor Turner?
Sorry, does that include SPPC? I should have checked that before I asked my question.
She's nodding, but I know she would rather, instead of nod, make a verbal comment because then it's on the record.
That is correct, yes.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you.
So there. Thanks very much. Any other? Thank you very much. Thoughtful comment, thoughtful answer, comments or questions otherwise. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, and I certainly don't want to take away from anything that was said. I think colleagues spoke well, and I appreciate this being brought forward. The one thing I would recognize is in Part C, with the implementation of the equity and inclusion lens and getting the report backs from all the service areas, I think we could also recognize the work of Councillor Cassidy and Councillor Ridley on the previous council in bringing forward and pushing the equity and inclusion lens. There were certainly many on council. I think it was unanimous to support it. But you know, without individuals on council driving change, you know, we don't get to the place where we have these tools at our disposal to be applied. So I just wanted to recognize some others who were involved in some previous work on this as well. And thank you to those who brought this forward.
So noted. Thank you, Councillor. And I'll look for any other comments or questions. Seeing none, let's call the question. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Pelosi.
Yes.
Councillor Kayavaga.
Kayavaga.
No, I know who you are. Councillor Kayavaga. I wanted to make it special. And making you special meant I missed Councillor Turner. Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Thanks very much. Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 15-0.
Thanks very much, colleagues. An important vote. And I'm sure I echo the comments of all the councillors involved in this when I say bravo. All right, we have, I believe, one other additional item that has been brought to our attention, colleagues, and perhaps I could turn that over to Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Sure. I think I'll take the chair, and I'll just look at my speakers list, and I see that the mayor is up to speak to this letter. I know, colleagues, this was circulated by me only about 2.5 hours before the meeting, and certainly apologize for the short notice. I think the explanation is obvious in the letter about why it was so late arriving. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to review the letter in advance of the meeting. I go ahead, Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor. I will apologize only for the short notice, not the content. Colleagues, we're about to enter stage 3 of COVID recovery. That's stage 3 of what is now commonly referred to as the first wave. Stage 3 means that we will be able to increase our crowd size. Stage 3 means that we will be able to increase the amount of business opportunities and social opportunities to get together. I think it's terrific. London has earned the right. There is another part of this, and that is that we have in front of us, unprecedented in our time, a pandemic that the world has not had to deal with like this. It's a major health issue. We know that. Those who are involved in health issues in our community know that only too well. Because it's a health issue, my absolute preference would be for the medical officer of health to declare that masks be made mandatory, face coverings be made mandatory as part of dealing with this. By the way, it's not the only thing we're dealing with, colleagues. We are asking people to continue to physically distance. We're asking people to continually to wash their hands. We're asking people continually to watch their numbers in terms of the social circles and the numbers of individuals in which they are able to congregate. And London has had a tremendous result. Bravo. And certainly in my many months in discussions and in conjunction with the medical officer of health, discussing the issue of the use of masks and the requirement to be socially responsible, he gets it. And I would tell you that we as a council will not be alone if we support this directive. Where we are at, what we are doing, and I just want to be very, very clear, because Dr. Mackey, our medical officer of health, has already issued certain Section 22 class orders requiring that face coverings be worn. But in the advent of stage 3, where I think the potential, and those who have signed this letter with me, believe that the potential is so great. It's why we brought this forward as quickly as we did. This, as you know, is not the preferred way to do our business. We know that. There is a bigger issue in terms of people's health. I believe that, and I believe that fundamentally. So what we are asking is we're asking that civic administration consult with the medical officer of health and the county, and for the medical officer of health to bring forward for our consideration legislative measures that are recommended by the medical officer of health to us so that we can enact them to reduce the risk of COVID-19 infections within our city. It would be deemed to be temporary, but it is important. And in that regard, it would require the wearing of masks or face coverings in enclosed public spaces. So colleagues, do I wish that we had, frankly, given much more notice? Of course. But there are some things like this issue of health. With the early announcement that London is one of the acknowledged leaders in positive and good health, that we had to put this, we brought this forward. So again, as I've indicated, not our preferred timing, but it's the reality of what we have to deal with. And I'm asking members of council, notwithstanding the short notice, to acknowledge that this is an important issue and there is a time to show leadership, and this is that time. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Holder. You kept it under the 5 minutes. I appreciate that. I have Councillor Cassidy next on the list, and I'm just looking around to see if there's any speakers. Please get the attention of Barb Westlake Power if you're in the chambers. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And I want to thank you and the Mayor for working on this. I'm happy to second this motion moved by the Mayor. As the Chair of the Board of Health, I'm here to say that this is a tool that we have at our disposal. This is a tool that I know the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor, as well as members of our civic administration, have already spoken about to Dr. Mackey, and have been working on this for some time and talking about this for some time. London is in a really good position right now. We've seen our numbers go down. We've seen them stay steadily low for some time. We've seen our deaths go away for now, thank goodness. But the risks remain. The risks for an outbreak that we don't know where it could come from. Those risks are real. We've seen it happen in other regions. So under the Health Promotion and Protection Act, there's a very strong authority that comes under the role of the medical officer of health. And that is an authority that is used with discretion and used in very serious circumstances where there is disease that needs to be brought under control immediately, and where there is evidence of effectiveness of that tool. Under City Council, we have legislative tools. And so this is our opportunity to put those tools together for our City Council to work in conjunction with the Middlesex London Health Unit and in conjunction with the Medical Officer of Health, using his guidance and expertise to help us do the things that we need to do. So we are aligned in this. We are using the tools that are available to our different roles in order to not only prevent possible future outbreaks, but also a very important part of this is to allay the concerns and the fears of our constituents as we move to a greater opening of our society. This will help people to go about the business of London with a little bit more certainty and a little bit more security. I can't stress enough that the most important thing that each one of us can do in London is maintain that physical distancing of 6 feet, with or without a mask. That is the strongest tool that all of us have at our disposal. So I'm happy to second this. I'm happy to see City Council move in this direction and work in concert with the Middlesex London Health Unit to keep this pandemic under control.
Okay, I just going to turn over the chair to Mayor Holder, and I will say I have Councillor Squire, then Councillor Lewis, Councillor Van Holst, and Councillor Morgan on the speakers list. I see Councillor Van Meerbergen and Councillor Hopkins as well. So if you could take it from there, Mayor Holder, go ahead.
Thanks very much. Let's start with Councillor Squire, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Since this pandemic started, I've obviously been involved to some extent as chair of London Transit, as a councillor. And over again, I have said to people, we have to defer to the opinion and knowledge of the medical officer of health to make the decisions with regard to public health safety, particularly the wearing of masks. Dr. Mackey has made decisions in that area, and I've deferred to them, even when perhaps maybe I didn't agree, but I have deferred to those decisions, and he has made them, and he made a decision recently on masks. He could make another decision. He could make an order to do what people are talking about tonight, which is to make masks mandatory in all enclosed spaces. And I think that would be an appropriate thing to do. And we should hear from Dr. Mackey. And when I say we, I don't mean administration. I don't mean part of council. I mean all of council. Dr. Mackey should be here saying to us, elected representatives of the City of London, here's what I think you should do. There's no impediment to that. Instead, again, the power, the authority, the decision-making, the consultation is being taken away from council. It's being passed on to administration to talk to Dr. Mackey and then come back to us and report. My preference would be to hear from Dr. Mackey. To have Dr. Mackey here saying, Councillor Squire, I know you've been relying on my decision-making. I know I've been everywhere saying we don't need masks in every area. And in fact, they're contraindicated to have them everywhere. But I've changed my mind. And I have a new approach. And I could accept that. But what I'm getting here tonight is sort of an indication that Dr. Mackey will support a decision of council to make masks mandatory in all areas. Well, I think my answer to that would be, well, then hand the whole authority over to us. Hand the authority to us. I'll make the decision. The rest of us can make the decision. We've heard from our constituents. If we're going to stop doing this on the basis strictly of scientific evidence and what I've heard from Dr. Mackey, then council can make the decision and I'm happy to vote on it. I have never felt more unimportant or ineffective or in fact useless as a councillor. I was sent out there with certain information to rely on the medical officer of health. And now I'm being told, the afternoon, a couple hours before a meeting, no, Councillor Squire, we're changing the approach here. We're going to have Dr. Mackey tell us something, and then we're going to make a decision. Well, if Dr. Mackey's going to stick to what he said all the way up till now, he's going to say, we don't need masks in every situation. I know we're going to phase 3, but he's made it really clear what his expectations are. So I'm very unsure about this motion, but what I'm really disappointed in is the role that the City Council has been placed in. We have been sent out there as city councilors, and I did this over and over again. And I know people aren't happy to hear this, but I said it over and over again, that I would rely on the medical officer of health to make the orders he thought were medically necessary for the citizens of London. I don't know why everything's changing tonight. I don't know why now it's a different approach. I would have liked to have known, but of course I didn't get this motion till late in the afternoon. I haven't had any chance to consult with anyone. And that's an important point on this one. I'm sorry. This could have been gotten to us earlier, but no one has spoken to me about this. I know lots of people, I mean, this is not uncommon for me that people don't contact me about stuff they do, and that's okay. But this is important. I've been out there staking my reputation as a city councillor on deferring to the scientific judgment of the medical officer of health. And now I'm being told we're changing approach right now. And I take this very seriously. I take this very seriously in the way we move forward as a council. Who are the leaders of this city? Is it the city council? I don't know anymore.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. First, I am going to say I agree with everything that I just heard from Councillor Squire, and I'll try not to repeat too much of it. I also want to say, and I want to take a moment to say to not just Dr. Mackey, but the entire staff at the Middlesex London Health Unit, how much I appreciate all the work, all the extra hours that they have put in over 5 months now dealing with this situation. And I'm not a doctor, and to Councillor Squire's point, when we're talking about a bridge repair, not only do I read the staff report from Ms. Scher and her team, but she's here to answer my questions. I am not going to support a motion that says have staff bring back a report that doesn't include Dr. Mackey coming here to answer questions that councillors may have. I think that just as we rely on our engineer for engineering decisions, we should be able to ask questions of our Chief Medical Officer of Health before we make a decision on a public health matter, which is what we're being asked to do. With regard to the notice today, and I say this with all due respect to councillors because I know that you are coming at this from a place where you want to do what is right, but this could have been brought as an emergent motion to council on Tuesday of next week. We all would have had days of notice to discuss, to consider, to consult with Dr. Mackey if we wanted, but instead we got this 2 hours before the meeting began. We heard on the weekend that the province was going to make an announcement about phase 3 on Monday. So we shouldn't have been surprised that a phase 3 announcement was made on Monday. I want to pick up on something that Councillor Cassidy said and allaying the concerns of the public. And I absolutely recognize why that's important. I do. I also have a very significant concern that we may unintentionally create a placebo effect. And I've said this before, both in the media and to constituents. I don't want people to think that masks are Iron Man armor. And I heard Councillor Cassidy say that physical distancing remains the most important tool in the toolbox, and she's absolutely right. And all the evidence from around the world, whether we're looking at a place like New Zealand, which has crushed the curve and not ever had to issue a mask order, or whether we're looking at a place like Italy where masks were required, the physical distancing was always the most important tool. So we can't let our guard down on that. She's absolutely right. I'm also concerned that we're going to make a decision as a council when our health unit is a regional body. It's the Middlesex London Health Unit. It's not the London Health Unit, it's the Middlesex London Health Unit. And I see the county is included in this motion, although my understanding from reaching out in the very short time I had to a county member, the lower tier municipalities have to make this decision. The county council can't make this decision without the support of the lower tier municipalities. If we are not taking a regional approach to this, we have thousands of people every day who commute into London from Thorndale and Arva and Dorchester and Strathroy to work or to shop and then go home. Or we have Londoners who commute out to those communities to work and then come home. So if we're not taking a regional approach, I'm really not sure how effective this is going to be. And then I have questions around enforcement, medical exemptions, all kinds of things that make this a very complicated question, which is why I don't want to report back from staff. I want Dr. Mackey to come and talk to us because I've been relying on his professional advice, just as Councillor Squire has since the beginning of this. And I continue to look to him for some guidance on this issue.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I see a couple interesting things in this motion. One is that we're asking the city solicitor to be involved with this. And so my question is, there is there reason to speak in confidence with our solicitor regarding this? Are there legal ramifications we should be looking at here? And if that's the case, then perhaps maybe I would like to hear those first before I comment further. So perhaps I could get an answer to that question.
That's a question that we'll direct through to to staff, perhaps the city solicitor or the city manager.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Ainsley Anderson from the City Solicitor's Office. And this was just put to me today as well, but there would be legal considerations in something like this, and those would be discussed in camera.
Okay, Your Worship. Well, if that's the case, I'd like to move that we go into camera to discuss the legal implications of council making a mandatory mask order, which is I think what ultimately this motion seems to be.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Squire. Any comments or questions? We did have, frankly, we did have an agenda of speakers here, but so let's, if there are no comments or questions, let's, Councillor Pelosa, on the question of going in camera, please go ahead.
Thank you for recognizing me. Just a question through you to our legal counsel, recognizing they just made the comment that they just received this notice themselves. Are they prepared to give information in closed session?
Ms. Ainsley?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, I'm prepared to advise of the types of issues that I'd request that you consider. I wouldn't be providing an opinion, as I understand the direction is actually to just engage in a consultation. So the issues could be fleshed out as part of that consultation, but I'm happy to advise of the types of considerations.
Councillor Pelosa, is that sufficient for your purpose? Okay. Any other comments or questions with respect to going in camera? Seeing none, we will call the question. I'll ask the clerk to read the motion, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, the motion reads that the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee convene in closed session in order to receive advice subject to solicitor-client privilege as it relates to potential additional legislative measures to prevent the spread of COVID-19.
Thank you. In a moment, we'll call the question. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Lewis.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes.
Councillor Lehman.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
I'll recuse and I'll drop off.
Councillor Pelosa.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 14-0 with 1 recuse.
So colleagues, just allow us a few moments to set up and then we'll go into closed session. So I will mention, if I might, to those paying mind that who are watching on the YouTube stream, that will be disconnected. And for those who would like to reconnect with us once we resume public session, that will be on the city streaming site. So to let you know that. And colleagues, I'll just ask you to give us a few moments, please.